Hello guys, welcome to Percy and Goddess Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy read about Naruto's as the 10-tailed dragon king? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Scroll in the Salt-Laden Air. The sea was tired. That was the only way Percy Jackson could describe it. Here, at the edge of the continent, where the land gave its final, weary sigh into the Atlantic. The water seemed to have lost its will. The late autumn waves didn't crash with their usual boisterous rage. They slumped against the shore, a slurry of gray foam and colder gray water, before receding with a sound like a drawn-out, defeated breath. The sky was a lid of solid pewter, pressing down, blurring the horizon so that it was impossible to tell where the melancholy water ended and the apathetic heavens began. The air, thick with salt and the damp chill of impending winter, clung to his skin, a constant, clammy reminder of the world's inertia. It was a mood that Percy understood intimately. He stood on the damp, packed sand of Montauk Beach, the place that had been a sanctuary for his mother and, by extension, for him. But today, it offered no comfort. It felt like a monument to a past he could no longer quite connect with. Two-time savior of Olympus, hero of the Titan and Giant Wars. The names felt like titles belonging to someone else, a character in a story he'd once read. The reality was the profound, gnawing silence that followed the final battle cry. Peace. They had won. They had achieved peace. And it was the most disquieting enemy he had ever faced. He traced the familiar outline of Riptide in his pocket, the pen's cool metal a phantom weight. For years, its presence had been a promise of action, a coiled spring of readiness. Now, it felt like a relic. Emender of a purpose that had been fulfilled. What does a sword do when there are no more dragons to slay? It rusts. Percy felt the rust in his soul, a slow, creeping oxidation of the spirit. He was 18, and he felt ancient. The others had found their new wars, their new purposes. Annabeth, his wise girl, was a whirlwind of blueprints and ambition. Her battlefield was now the challenge of urban planning, of integrating Greek and Roman architectural principles for a new wing of the library at Camp Jupiter. She spoke of load-bearing columns and aqueduct gradients with the same ferocious paw. Sajan she had once reserved for battle strategies. He loved it for her, truly, but her letters and iris messages were filled with a language he no longer spoke. Her world was one of building, of creating a future, brick by meticulous brick. His world had been one of breaking things, monsters, armies, God's plans. He didn't know how to build. He only knew how to survive. He kicked at a piece of driftwood, sending a spray of wet sand arcing into the air. The motion was listless. He'd come here to escape the cloying cheerfulness of Camp Half-Blood. The younger campers looked at him with a reverence that made his skin crawl, as if he were a living statue in a garden of heroes. They whispered his name when he walked by the amphitheater. They stopped their training to watch him spar at the arena. But his spars were half-hearted. There was no edge, no life or death stakes to sharpen his senses. His power, the raw, elemental fury of the sea that lived in his veins, felt dormant, like a great beast sleeping in a sunless cavern of his gut. It was there, he knew. He could feel its weight. But it wouldn't stir. It had no reason to. A strange pressure shift in the air made the hairs on his arms stand up. The oppressive stillness that had defined the day was suddenly, violently, broken. The temperature plummeted, and the scent of the air changed. The familiar tang of salt was overwhelmed by something else. Something sharp and electric, the smell of ozone mixed with the deep, cold brine of the abyss. He looked up. The solid gray sky was churning, darkening not to black, but to a bruised, venomous purple. The clouds roiled as if stirred by an unseen, colossal hand. It wasn't natural. Percy had seen his father and uncle argue over the weather his entire life. He knew the feel of a divine squall, the petulant energy of a god's tantrum. This was different. This felt sterile, calculated. The wind didn't rise to a howl. It simply appeared, a solid wall of force that tore at his clothes and whipped his hair across his face. The sea, once so lethargic, recoiled as if struck. The water for 50 yards out from the shore went unnaturally flat and taut, like the skin of a drum. And then, silence. A total, Unnerving absence of sound. The wind vanished. The waves froze mid-slump. Not even the cry of a gull. It was as if the world was holding its breath. Percy's hand was in his pocket, his fingers wrapped around Riptide. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm in the soundless void. Every instinct, honed by years of life or death combat, screamed at him. Wrong, wrong, wrong. A single, silent fork of lightning, brighter than the sun, lanced down from the purple miasma and struck the flat, waiting sea. There was no thunder. There was only light, a searing, pure, white light that bleached all color from the world. Percy threw an arm over his eyes, a pointless gesture. The light was absolute. It was followed by a concussive force that was not sound, but pure pressure. It hit him like a physical blow, staggering him back, forcing the air from his lungs in a sharp gasp. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The pressure vanished. The wind returned to a gentle, cold breeze. The sky faded back to its monotonous pewter gray. The waves resumed their lazy, slumping journey to the shore. The only evidence that anything had happened was the lingering scent of ozone and the frantic, adrenalized thumping of his own heart. It had lasted no more than 10 seconds. It was a storm that acted like an assassination. Percy stood, breathing heavily, scanning the horizon, the sky, the sea. Nothing. No trireme, no sea monster, no angry god. Just the empty, tired beach. Had he imagined it? No. The ghost scent of ozone was too real, the tremor in his hands too pronounced. His eyes swept the shoreline, tracing the new high-water mark left by the strange, recoiling tide. And there, half buried in the wet, dark sand exactly where the lightning had struck, was something that hadn't been there before. It was a box, or a case, long and rectangular, about the length of his forearm. It was made of a gnarled, dark wood that seemed to drink the meager light. Its surface whorled and knotted like the root of an ancient tree. It was studded with barnacles that seemed impossibly old, their shells thick and layered like geological strata. But the wood itself was pristine, untouched by rot or water damage, despite clearly having spent an eon at the bottom of the sea. There was no visible lock, only a complex, interlocking pattern of what looked like stylized waves and whirlpools carved into its lid. Hesitantly, Percy knelt beside it. A strange energy emanated from the object, a low thrum that vibrated not in the air, but in the marrow of his bones. It was powerful, he could feel that much. But it was a flavor of power he had never tasted. It wasn't Olympian, with its arrogant crackle of authority. It wasn't chthonic, with its cold, earthy dread. It was something else, something neutral, ancient, and vast as the ocean itself. He ran his fingers over the carved lid. The wood was cold and smooth as polished stone. As his fingertips traced the central, most intricate whirlpool carving, it glowed with a soft, cerulean light. With a click that sounded like stones grinding together deep underwater, the interlocking patterns receded. The lid hissed open, releasing a puff of air that smelled of ancient paper and the clean, sterile scent of a lightning strike. Inside, nestled in a bed of what looked like spun sea silk, lay a single, magnificent scroll. The handles were made of polished, pearlescent seashell, and the scroll itself was bound by a simple leather cord. It seemed to hum with the same resonant energy as the case. With a reverence he didn't quite understand, Percy lifted it out. The scroll was heavier than it looked, solid and substantial in his hands. He untied the cord. He unrolled the first few inches. The parchment, or whatever it was, something far more durable and fine, was a pale, creamy white. And on it was writing. The script was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a column of elegant, complex characters, painted with a brush of exquisite precision. They were beautiful, but utterly alien. Yet, as he focused on them, a strange thing happened. The characters seemed to blur, to ripple like a reflection in a disturbed pond. And then, the meaning, the pure, unadulterated concept behind them, flowed directly into his mind, bypassing language altogether. The Chronicle of the Uzumaki, the title announced itself in his thoughts. Not in words, but in a wave of understanding. The testament of the one who tamed the maelstrom. Fascinated, he unrolled it further. It was a story, an epic. It spoke of a different world, a different cosmology, a world without Greek gods or Roman legions, but one brimming with its own form of power, a tangible life force that permeated all things, which the scroll named chakra. It told of a boy, an outcast named Naruto Uzumaki, born a pariah, a vessel for a creature of pure, destructive energy, a nine-tailed fox demon. Percy sat on the cold sand, the strange, soulless sky above, and lost himself in the chronicle. He read of a boy who refused to be defined by the hatred of others, who fought with a desperate, joyful tenacity. But it was the description of the power that truly captivated him. The scroll described, with a clarity that was both poetic and ruthlessly technical, how this Naruto learned to control the energy within him. He didn't just unleash it. He molded it. He gave it shape, form, and purpose. He created clones from pure energy, summoned colossal animal spirits, and even learned to harness the natural energy of the world itself, blending it with his own to achieve a state of transcendent power the scroll called Sage Mode. The concepts were alien, but the core ideas resonated with something deep inside Percy. Chakra, this life energy the scroll spoke of, felt analogous to his own demigod life force, the iicor that made him stronger, faster, more durable than any mortal. But he had always treated it as a simple reservoir of fuel or his water bending and hurricane summoning. He'd never considered it a substance to be shaped, a tool to be wielded with finesse. The scroll spoke of hand signs, of mental discipline, of a perfect balance between spiritual and physical energy. It was a science, an art form, a philosophy. The epic continued, detailing Naruto's growth, his battles, his triumphs. He didn't just become a great warrior. He became a leader, a unifier, a symbol of hope. And then, the scroll detailed his final evolution. He had moved beyond simply mastering the nine-tailed beast within him. He sought a deeper understanding, a unification of all such beasts, and in doing so, he touched the primal source of all life in his world. He had become something more. The 10-tailed Dragon King, the scroll named him. It described a being of unimaginable power, one who could create life from nothing, who could shape landscapes with a thought, whose will could rewrite the laws of his reality. He hadn't ascended to godhood by petitioning some existing pantheon. He had, through sheer force of will, discipline, and understanding, become a force of nature unto himself. He did not bargain with power, he was power. The world was a tapestry, and he had learned to weave its threads. Percy's breath hitched. A profound, aching yearning filled him. This was the answer. This was the path he hadn't known he was looking for. Not a new war, but a new way of being. A way to take the immense, untamed power sleeping inside him and give it purpose beyond mere destruction. To build, to create, to become a protector in a way he had never imagined. He sat there for what could have been hours, the gray light beginning to fade, the scroll a luminous secret in his hands. The sea had found its voice again, a low, rhythmic shushing against the shore. A profound sense of hope, the first he had felt in a year, bloomed in his chest. The rust in his soul felt like it was beginning to flake away. Miles away, the late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the strawberry fields of Camp Half-Blood. The place was a hive of peaceful activity. The clang of swords from the arena was the enthusiastic, rhythmic sound of practice, not battle. Laughter echoed from the volleyball courts. The scent of roasting marshmallows was already beginning to drift from the campfire amphitheater. It was an idyllic scene, a hard-won paradise. Which was why the little inconsistencies were so jarring. Annabeth Chase stood over a large drafting table set up near the big house, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and a smudge of graphite decorated her cheek. Spread before her was an ambitious new design for the camp's armory, one that incorporated magically expanding walls and self-sorting racks. It was a complex problem, and she loved it. But her focus was fractured. "It just doesn't make any sense," she muttered, tapping a drafting pencil against her chin. Chiron, in his wheelchair form, looked over her shoulder, his expression troubled. "I agree, my dear. A B flat, Grover insists." The entire note, for a full 3 seconds, simply ceased to be. Earlier that afternoon, Grover Underwood had been playing a tune for the Dryads, a sprightly melody on his reed pipes. Halfway through a bar, his pipes had produced only a puff of silent air. He'd looked down to find a perfect, half-inch segment of his magical pipes had vanished. It hadn't broken or shattered. It had just gone. One moment it was there, a piece of carved elder wood humming with nature magic. The next, a clean gap, as if a surgeon had excised it from reality. A few moments later, it had reappeared, but the magic of the tune was broken, and the dryads had retreated into their trees, shivering. And then there was Clarissa's spear. Chiron continued, his voice low. She was demonstrating a disarming technique with a new Ares camper. The tip of her spear, Maimer, just blipped. Gone. Not the whole spearhead, mind you. Just the last 2 inches. It returned a moment later, but she said for that second, the spear felt wrong. Incomplete. Annabeth pushed a stray curl from her face. And the corner of the Ares cabin. And the section of the climbing wall. It's like small pieces of the world are just blinking. Flickering. Chiron corrected gently. As if the world is a candle flame in a draft. Magic fluctuates, Annabeth said, trying to impose logic on the illogical. It was her nature. Maybe it's a side effect from the war. Residual unstable energies from the doors of death, or Gaia's defeat. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than Chiron. I can run some calculations. Cross-reference it with historical accounts of magical fallout after major conflicts. Perhaps, the centaur said, but his ancient eyes held a deep, profound worry that went beyond simple magical fluctuations. This felt different, colder, more fundamental. Annabeth sighed, her shoulders slumping for a fraction of a second before she straightened them again. The leader, the architect, couldn't afford to slump. Where's Percy? She asked, the question lighter than the sudden weight in her chest. I haven't seen him since this morning. He went to Montauk, Chiron said softly. He said he needed some time. The sea air. Annabeth nodded, a familiar ache settling in. She knew he was struggling. They all were, in their own ways, but Percy, he was the epicenter of their wars. The silence that followed was bound to be loudest for him. She felt a pang of guilt for being so absorbed in her work. But it was how she coped. She built things to prove the world wasn't broken beyond repair. He broke the things that tried to break the world. They were 2 sides of the same coin, but lately, it felt like the coin was lying on its edge, threatening to topple. She made a mental note to Iris message him tonight, to close the distance that had been quietly growing between them. She looked back at her blueprints. At the solid, reassuring lines of her new armory. Logic, order, rules. These were the things that held the world together. Whatever was happening, it would have an explanation. It had to. As twilight bled across the sky, turning the pewter gray to a soft, bruised lavender, Percy finally rolled the scroll closed. His muscles were stiff from sitting for so long, but his mind was alight. Buzzing with possibilities. The chronicle was more than a story, it was a key. A key to a door inside himself he never knew existed. He stood up, brushing the cold sand from his jeans. He looked at the sea. His sea. It no longer looked tired. It looked like a challenge. A vast, untapped reservoir of power waiting for a mind that could properly command it. Balance, the scroll had insisted. Do not push the river. Guide its flow. Become the riverbank, not the rock that stands against it. He closed his eyes, turning his focus inward. For the first time, he didn't just feel his power as a hot, churning knot in his stomach. He tried to see it, as the scroll had described. He envisioned his own life force, his divine iicor, as a network of brilliant blue channels running through his body. A mirror of the sea itself. It was chaotic, untamed, a maelstrom contained in a human form. He took a deep breath, the salt air filling his lungs. He remembered the diagram in the scroll, the one showing the gentle, circular flow of energy. He didn't try to command the sea outside. He tried to guide the sea inside. He focused on the energy in his right hand, coaxing it, shaping it not with his will, but with his intent. He imagined a perfect sphere, a tiny, self-contained ocean. He extended his hand, palm up, over the damp sand. He felt the familiar tug in his gut, but it was different this time. It wasn't a violent wrenching, but a smooth, controlled extension of himself. The ichor flowed down his arm, pooling in his palm, not as a feeling, but as a tangible substance he could mentally mold. Slowly, impossibly, the water at his feet began to respond. A small puddle gathered, then rose, not in a splashy column, but in a silent, cohesive stream. It flowed into the air above his hand, defying gravity. It swirled, compressed, and solidified its shape. Percy opened his eyes. Floating an inch above his palm, utterly motionless, was a perfect sphere of seawater. It was the size of a baseball, crystal clear, and completely silent. It did not drip. It did not waver. Inside it, he could see miniature currents swirling in a complex, stable pattern. The fading twilight refracted through it, casting a tiny, dancing rainbow on his skin. He had held the entire ocean in his grasp before, bent thousands of gallons to his will. But that had been an act of rage, of brute force. This was an act of creation. It was perfect control. It was balance. A slow, genuine smile spread across Percy's face, the first in what felt like a lifetime. The weight of his past victories and the emptiness of the peace that followed seemed to evaporate into the salt-laden air. He wasn't a relic. He wasn't a sword destined to rust. He was a river that was just learning its true course. And he had a feeling it was about to carve a whole new canyon through the world. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The geometry of iicor. A secret, Percy decided, was a heavy thing. It had a mass and a density all its own. And if you carried it around long enough, it would weigh you down, compress you, until you either shattered or were forged into something harder and sharper than before. The scroll of the Uzumaki was the heaviest secret he had ever held, heavier than the sky, heavier even than the crushing weight of Tartarus's atmosphere. It was the weight of pure, unadulterated potential, and he knew, with a certainty that vibrated in his very bones, that he could not begin to explore it under the watchful, loving, and ultimately misunderstanding eyes at Camp Half-Blood. They would see it as a threat. Annabeth would try to analyze it, to break it down into historical precedent and logical schematics, and she would fail, because the scroll was a philosophy wrapped in a power that defied their world's rules. Chiron would be wary, seeing only the potential for hubris. The gods would see a rival power source and seek to either control or destroy it. No, this journey had to be a solitary one. At least for now, he needed a laboratory, a sanctuary, a forge. For 3 days, he searched. He swam further and deeper than ever before, pushing his body past its known limits. He explored the abyssal plains, chased the strange, bioluminescent life through lightless canyons, and felt the tectonic groans of the Earth's crust. He was looking for a place that felt alive, a nexus of power that the scroll had described as essential for a practitioner's growth, a place where the world's natural energy was raw and abundant. On the 3rd day, south of the Azores, he found it. It was a deep-sea trench, a jagged wound in the ocean floor that plunged into utter blackness. But at its bottom, the darkness was alive with light. A massive hydrothermal vent field, a forest of black smokers, spewed plumes of superheated, mineral-rich water into the crushing cold. The energy here was palpable, a thrumming, vital force that made the water around him feel thick with life. Following this energy, he found the entrance to a cave system, its mouth fringed with strange, phosphorescent sea anemones that pulsed with a soft, blue-green light. The inside was a cathedral of the deep. The main chamber was vast, larger than the Poseidon cabin, its ceiling lost in the darkness above. The only light came from glowing mosses and strange, crystalline fungi that grew in intricate patterns across the walls, fed by the minerals from a smaller, gentler vent at the chamber's center. The water was warm, clear, and hummed with a constant, low-frequency vibration of power. The immense pressure of the deep sea sealed him off from the world above. It was perfect. This would be his forge. For the first week, he did not practice. He studied. He sat cross-legged on a smooth, obsidian ledge at the chamber's floor. The scroll unrolled before him, its otherworldly script glowing faintly in the dim light. He absorbed the theory, the philosophy, the sheer, breathtaking science of it all. To keep his thoughts in order, he began to document his understanding, using a stylus of sharpened obsidian to etch notes onto wide, flat pieces of slate he found in the cave. It was the most academic work he had done in his life. And it felt more vital than any battle. From the notes of Percy Jackson, location classified. Entry 01. Ichor versus chakra. The scroll calls it chakra, a blend of spiritual and physical energy. For me, it's my demigod lifeblood. Ichor. But I've always thought of it as just me. The stuff that makes me, me. The scroll says this is the first mistake. It's not just me. It's a substance, a tool, malleable. It has properties, density, flow rate, output. The first step isn't to use it, but to understand it. To map the rivers of it inside myself. When I focus, I can feel it. It's not a hot knot in my gut anymore. It's a current, flowing from a reservoir deep inside, branching out to every part of my body. The primary channel feels like it runs along my spine. It's warm. It's alive. It feels like the sea. Entry 03. The principle of intent. This is the hard part. My whole life, I've used my powers through will. I want the wave to crash. I want the water to grab him. It's an act of force, of imposing my desire on the world. The scroll calls this the brute's path. It talks about intent instead. It's a different concept. It's not about forcing the iicor to do something. It's about impressing upon it a clear, detailed concept of what it should become. You don't tell the water to become a snake. You provide it the perfect idea of a snake, its shape, its scales, its sinuous movement, its predatory purpose. The iicor, being an extension of my own life force, then strives to fulfill that perfect idea. Will is a command. Intent is a blueprint. Entry 07. Filament theory and construct stability. To create a stable construct, I can't just push out a blob of power. I have to extrude it in controlled threads, or filaments, of iicor-infused water. I then have to weave these filaments together mentally, like a basket. The more complex the weave, the more stable the construct. A simple, over-under, weave creates a basic shield. A helical, multi-layered weave can create a solid, three-dimensional object. The stability is proportional to the clarity of my intent and the complexity of the weave. This is geometry. It's math. Annabeth would probably love this part. It's also incredibly difficult. The second week, he put theory into practice. It was an unmitigated disaster. His first attempt at a complex construct, a simple cube, held its shape for a glorious 3 seconds before his concentration wavered. The iicor filaments lost their cohesion, and the cube detonated with the force of a small depth charge. The shockwave slammed him into the cave wall, leaving his ears ringing and his body aching. The entire chamber was churned into a vortex of silt and displaced moss. It took an hour for the water to clear. He tried again, and again. For days, his forge was the site of constant, frustrating failure. He tried to form the scouting serpent described in the scroll. His first attempt produced a formless, writhing tendril of water that slapped him in the face before dissolving into a cloud of bubbles. The second attempt looked vaguely snake-like, but it had all the predatory grace of a wet noodle, flopping uselessly in the water before unraveling. The shields were worse. He would form the spinning disk of water, a vortex of compressed currents, and try to test it against the steady push of the central geothermal vent. Most of them shattered on impact. One held for a moment, then warped, folded in on itself, and shot off like a broken propeller, careening around the chamber and forcing him to dive for cover before it disintegrated. Frustration began to curdle into a cold, familiar dread. The echo of Tartarus whispered in the back of his mind. The feeling of being utterly, hopelessly powerless. Of being prey. He had been given this key. This chance to become something more, and he was failing. The power was there. He could feel it, a titan's strength sleeping in his blood, but he was trying to awaken it with the fumbling hands of a child. On the 5th day of failure, something broke. He had just failed for the dozenth time to create a simple, solid spear. The water construct had wobbled in front of him for a moment and then collapsed into a harmless splash. A roar of pure, undiluted rage tore from his throat, a sound that was lost to the immense pressure of the deep. He wasn't just Percy anymore. He was the son of the Earthshaker. And his fury was a tectonic force. He stopped trying to use intent. He fell back on pure, unadulterated will. He threw his hands forward, and the sea answered his rage. The water in the chamber didn't just move, it exploded. A torrential current ripped through the cave, tearing the glowing moss from the walls, scouring the obsidian floor, and threatening to rip the entire cave system apart. It was raw, unrestrained power, the kind he had used to topple armies. And it was completely, utterly useless for the fine, delicate work the scroll demanded. When the maelstrom subsided, he was left panting in the murky, Debris filled water, his body thrumming with residual power. He had achieved nothing but destruction. He had proven the scroll right. He was a brute. Exhausted, he drifted down to the obsidian ledge. He stared at the scroll, its elegant script seeming to mock him. He was ready to give up, to return to the surface and be the simple, blunt instrument of power he had always been. But then his eyes caught a passage he had read but not truly understood. "The maelstrom is not your enemy," the chronicle whispered in his mind. "You were born of it. Do not seek to tame it. Seek to understand its heart. The hurricane does not fight the wind, it is the wind. The whirlpool does not fight the current, it is the current. Find the eye of your own storm. Find your center, and from that point of stillness, you may guide everything." It clicked. A profound, paradigm-shifting click in his mind. He had been treating his own power as an adversary. He had been fighting his own nature. He was the son of the Stormbringer. The maelstrom wasn't just in his gut, it was his gut. It was his soul. He had to stop commanding it from the outside and start guiding it from the inside. He closed his eyes, ignoring the floating debris around him. He let go of his anger, his frustration, his fear. He sank deep into himself, past the conscious thought, past the demigod instincts, until he found it. The reservoir, the core of his power. It was a chaotic, swirling vortex of brilliant blue energy. But at its very center, there was a single, infinitesimally small point of perfect calm. The eye of his storm. He focused on that single point of stillness. He didn't try to create anything. He just was. And from that point of calm, he extended a single thread of thought, a gentle, coaxing tendril of intent. Serpent, not a thing of rage. A thing of purpose, silent, watchful, an extension of my senses. He didn't even open his eyes. He didn't need to. He felt the iicor flow, not as a torrent, but as a smooth, steady river. He felt the filaments extrude and weave together, the pattern flowing from his mind with an ease that felt like breathing. He felt the construct stabilize, its form perfect and complete. He opened his eyes. Floating before him was a sea serpent, 10 feet long, coiled in the water. It was magnificent. It was woven from the clearest water, yet it looked solid. Its surface shimmering with captured light. It had scales that were miniature, controlled whirlpools. Its eyes were two glowing orbs of captured bioluminescence. It turned its head and looked at him. And through a strange, new sense, he looked back at himself through its eyes. He could feel the pressure of the water on its skin, could see the thermal currents of event as shifting patterns of light and dark. It was a part of him, a detached limb of his own consciousness. A slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. He had found the key. The days that followed were a blur of creation. The breakthrough led to an exponential growth in his skill. He perfected the serpent, sending it out of the cave to scout the deep trenches, its senses becoming his own. He learned to create a flock of them. A silent, deadly vanguard. He mastered the shield. He learned to spin the whirlpool so fast it became a semi-solid wall, denser than steel. It held against the full, focused blast of the hydrothermal vent, the superheated water parting around it as if striking solid land. He learned to detach it, to have it orbit him like a guardian satellite. And then, he created the blade. It was the pinnacle of his control, the ultimate expression of the scroll's teachings. He extended his index finger and focused a single, impossibly thin filament of iicor. He drew water into it and used the full pressure of the deep sea, compressing the filament into a monomolecular edge. The result was a 3-foot-long, nearly invisible blade of shimmering water extending from his hand. It made no sound. It had no weight. He tested it on a massive pillar of obsidian that reached from the floor to the ceiling of the cavern. He didn't slash with it. He simply touched its edge to the rock and walked forward. The blade passed through the 20-foot thick pillar as if it were air. There was no grinding, no resistance. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan that vibrated through the water, the top half of the pillar slid silently off the bottom half and crashed to the floor of the cave. The cut was so clean, so perfect, it looked like it had been sliced by a god. Percy stared at the result, at the lethal, beautiful precision of it. This was not the brute's path. This was the path of the Dragon King. The air in the Principia of New Rome was hit with a tension that had nothing to do with the threat of war. It was the cold, sterile tension of the unknown. Reina Avila Ramirez Arellano, praetor of the 12th Legion Fulminata, stood before a large map of Northern California. Her arms crossed tightly over her purple cloak. Her face, usually a mask of stoic command, was etched with deep concern. "Another one appeared this morning," Frank Jong said, his voice a low rumble. He stood beside her, his broad shoulders slumped slightly. Just beyond the Pomerian line, a patrol from the 5th cohort stumbled into it. They said it was like walking into a hole in the world. Reina's jaw tightened. The void spots, as the legionnaires had taken to calling them, were spreading. They were circular patches of land, anywhere from 10 to 50 feet in diameter. Inside them, things went wrong. Colors seemed muted. Sounds were muffled. Most disturbingly, demigods felt their own vitality being leached away, a slow, metaphysical drive. Aim that left them weak and nauseated for hours afterward. Worst of all, the auguries were blind. The augurs, who could read the will of the gods in the flight of birds, saw nothing. Birds would not fly over the spots. Any attempts to divine their nature resulted in shattered ritual implements and prophecies that came out as nothing but panicked static. Terminus is useless, Reina stated flatly. He can't even register the spot's existence. To him, the land beyond the boundary is simply normal. And the gods? Frank asked. Silent, Reina replied, the word clipped. My mother has not answered a prayer in a week. Apollo's new oracle at Camp Half-Blood is apparently speaking nothing but gibberish about unraveling threads. This was a threat that Roman discipline and might could not solve. You could not stab a hole in the world. You could not fight an enemy that was defined by its absence. They had tried everything. Blessings from the Lares, unicorn horn purification rituals, even having a son of Vulcan try to analyze the soil. Nothing worked. It was a problem outside the scope of their mythology. And that thought led her to one inevitable conclusion. They needed a different perspective. A less rigid, more chaotic one. Frank, you have the command, she said, turning from the map. Her decision was made. I'm going to Camp Half-Blood. They've reported similar, if smaller, phenomena. This is a shared threat. We need to coordinate. Do you think they have an answer? Frank asked, his expression doubtful. I think they have Percy Jackson, Reina answered, and for the first time. A flicker of something other than worry crossed her face. If anyone was an expert in impossible, reality-defying threats, it was the son of Poseidon. Her journey was swift. She flew on her Pegasus, Scipio, pushing him to his limits. Arriving at Camp Half-Blood, she was met with a strange mixture of warmth and anxiety. Chiron and a stressed-looking Annabeth Chase confirmed her fears. There, flickering, incidents and new roams, void spots, were undoubtedly related. It's a form of decay, Annabeth theorized, pacing in the big house war room. But it's not physical or magical in a way we can measure. It's conceptual. It's attacking the idea of things. We need Percy, Reina said, cutting to the chase. His power is elemental, primordial. Perhaps it can counter this. Annabeth stopped pacing. A complicated emotion crossed her face. Worry, frustration, and something that looked like loneliness. He's not here, she said. He left over 2 weeks ago. He said he needed time. No one's heard from him since. Reina's heart sank. But then Chiron added, he has not vanished, however. The satyrs can still feel his presence in the world. It is strong, stronger than ever before, and it is concentrated far out in the Atlantic. That was all Reina needed. She was a daughter of Bellona, the goddess of war. She was a hunter. She could track the scent of power. Thanking Chiron and a reluctant Annabeth, she took to the skies again, flying east, chasing a feeling, a faint vibration on the edge of her senses, the signature of a power unlike any other. She found him 300 miles off the coast of Portugal. Or rather, she found the spot where the energy was most potent. As she circled on Scipio, the air itself seemed to hum. She could feel it in her teeth. And then, the surface of the ocean below her began to swell upwards. He rose from the depths, not in a geyser of power as she might have expected, but silently, lifted on a pillar of calm water. He stood atop it, dry, his black hair waving gently in the wind. And he was different. It wasn't just the fact that he was standing on water as if it were solid ground. It was his eyes. The familiar, sea-green eyes were still there. But they held a new depth, a frightening new intensity. They were ancient eyes, filled with the patient, crushing power of the abyss. His posture wasn't the lazy slouch of the boy she knew. It was perfectly still, perfectly balanced, radiating a quiet, absolute confidence that made the air around him feel heavy. He wasn't the reckless hero anymore. He looked like a king in exile. "Reina," he said. His voice was the same, but the cadence was different. Calmer, deeper. "I was wondering when someone would come looking." She landed Scipio on a hastily created platform of floating, hardened water that Percy seemed to conjure without a thought. She dismounted, her praetor's cloak whipping in the wind. "We have a problem, Percy. In New Rome, patches of nothingness. They're spreading." He listened as she explained everything, his gaze unwavering. He didn't fidget, didn't interrupt. He simply absorbed the information, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "It's the same thing that was happening at Camp Half-Blood," he finally said. "An unraveling. A fraying of the world. Can you fight it?" Reina asked, the question stark and direct. Percy didn't answer with words. He looked at her, then raised a hand. The seawater beside them rose and swirled. He was not violent or showy. He simply guided it. The water wove itself together, filament by filament, into a perfect, life-sized replica of a Roman eagle, the Aquila of her legion. It was exquisitely detailed, from its sharp beak to the individual feathers on its wings. It hovered in the air between them, shimmering. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he sent it soaring into the sky, where it circled them once before dissolving back into the sea. Reina's breath caught in her throat. She had seen him summon tidal waves, create hurricanes. That was raw power. This was artistry. This was control on a level she couldn't comprehend. Percy then turned his gaze to a tall, jagged sea stack about half a mile away. He lifted his other hand, and an almost invisible line of light, of pure, compressed force, extended from his fingertips. He made a slow, deliberate cutting motion in the air. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, grinding protest, the top two-thirds of the massive rock formation slid cleanly off and crashed into the ocean, sending up a colossal plume of white spray. The cut was perfectly flat, as if made by a cosmic blade. Reina stared, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. This wasn't the borrowed, chaotic power of a god's son. This felt different. It was his own. It was absolute, precise, and wielded with the calm certainty of a master craftsman. She, a leader who had carried the burden of an entire civilization on her shoulders, who had searched her whole life for a partner who could stand as her equal, was suddenly looking at a power that dwarfed her own aspirations. She had come to the ocean seeking an ally, a hero to help fight a strange new war. She had found a king. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Unraveling City. The call came not as a ringtone, but as a panicked bleating in his mind. Percy and Reina were halfway across the Atlantic. Riding the crest of a wave Percy had shaped into a sleek, hydrodynamic platform that cut through the water at supernatural speed. Reina, a bastion of Roman stoicism, was actually looking impressed. Then, Grover's voice, terrified and frayed, echoed in his thoughts, a privilege of their empathic link. "Percy, it's bad. It's happening here. In the city. The whole place. It's going quiet." Percy didn't need to ask for details. He could feel it himself, a distant wrongness on the edge of his perception, like a discordant note in the grand song of the ocean. He glanced at Reina, whose hand had instinctively gone to the hilt of the gladius at her side. She had felt it too, a tremor in the fabric of the world a daughter of the war goddess was uniquely attuned to. New York, they said in unison. Annabeth was already there. She hadn't been waiting for a psychic goat man to sound the alarm. For 2 weeks, she had been a woman possessed, collating data. With the ferocious intensity of a scholar on the verge of a breakthrough. She had gathered every report of the flickering from Camp Half-Blood, cross-referenced them with the accounts of New Rome's void spots that Reina had provided, and fed it all into a series of Daedalus's magical tablets. She treated the fraying as an equation to be solved, a puzzle to be deciphered. Her analysis had pointed to a massive convergence, a pooling of the entropic energy, in a place they had defended so many times before, Lower Manhattan. She was standing on the rooftop of a 60-story skyscraper overlooking the financial district when Percy and Raina arrived. Percy had drawn a pillar of water from the East River, lifting them silently to her position. The Annabeth who turned to greet them was not the relaxed architect he had last seen at camp. This was General Annabeth, her gray eyes stormy and calculating, her jaw set. She was armed with her Dracon bone sword, a shield, and a leather satchel overflowing with scrolls and tablets. She was ready for a war, but the battlefield was unlike any they had ever faced. Below them, the city was drowning. Not in water, but in a fog so thick and unnatural it seemed to have a physical weight. It wasn't the gentle, rolling fog of the coast. This was a stagnant, greasy miasma, clinging to the glass and steel canyons, swallowing sound and light. It swirled with a slow, sickly languor. And its color was a disquieting off-white, the color of old bones or forgotten paper. The air smelled of static electricity, damp cellars, and something else, a faint, cloying sweetness. Like decaying memories. Look, Annabeth said, her voice tight, pointing toward the distant glow of Times Square. The massive electronic billboards, usually a vibrant, chaotic symphony of light, were a mess of glitching pixels and nonsensical, crawling text that looked like a corrupted computer file. It's interfering with everything. Mortal communications are down, the power grid is fluctuating. It's not just magical, it's physical. Percy looked down into the fog-choked streets. He didn't just see the fog, he could feel it. It was a blanket of profound conceptual static, actively smothering the vibrant life force of the city. The usual cacophony of Manhattan, the traffic, the shouts, the endless energy, was muted, replaced by an unsettling, humming silence. "What's the plan, Chase?" Raina asked, her voice a sharp, practical edge in the oppressive quiet. She scanned the streets below, her predator's gaze analyzing sightlines and potential threats. "The energy ready. NGS are highest around the stock exchange on Broad Street," Annabeth replied, pulling up a glowing map on her tablet. "It's the epicenter. The fraying seems to be drawn to places of high conceptual density. Places built on abstract systems, finance, law, history. It's not eating buildings, it's eating the idea of the city." She looked at Percy, a question in her analytical gray eyes. "Your power, this new control you have, can you disperse it?" "I don't think it can be dispersed," Percy said, his voice quiet. He was looking at the fog with the same focus he had shown Raina over the ocean. "It's not a thing to be scattered. It's an absence. You can't scatter a hole. You have to fill it." Before Annabeth could ask him to elaborate on his cryptic statement, a sound drifted up from the streets below. A sound that cut through the silence. It was a howl, but it was distorted, skipping and stuttering like a scratched record. It was the sound of a monster, and it was in pain. "Plan's simple, then," Raina said, drawing her imperial gold gladius. The metal shone with a soft, internal light. "We go to the epicenter, we find what's causing this, and we kill it." Annabeth nodded, her brief moment of theoretical analysis over. "She's right. Let's move." Their descent into the fog was like entering another dimension. The moment the thick miasma enveloped them, the world changed. The oppressive silence intensified, broken only by the muffled, rhythmic dripping of condensation from fire escapes. The air was cold and clammy. Their own footsteps, which should have echoed in the empty streets, were swallowed by the fog, giving them a disquieting sense of weightlessness. The effect on the few mortals caught in the area was horrifying. They weren't panicked. They were simply broken. A man in a business suit walked in a perfect circle, his gaze fixed on a point in the middle distance, his lips moving but no sound emerging. A pair of tourists stared blankly at a street sign for Wall Street. But the letters on the sign were a flickering, unreadable jumble of geometric shapes. Percy saw a hot dog vendor standing by his cart, repeatedly trying to put a hot dog into a bun, but his hands would pass through it. The action resetting every few seconds in a miserable, soundless loop. They were ghosts in their own lives, their reality temporarily deleted. Annabeth's face was pale. "It's worse than I thought. It's actively erasing short-term memory and object permanence." She tapped her tablet, but the screen flickered, displaying the same corrupted symbols as the street sign before going dark. "Useless," she spat, shoving it back in her satchel. "We're blind down here. The stuttering howl echoed again, closer this time. From a cross street shrouded in the thickest part of the fog, a shape emerged. Then another, and another, a pack of hellhounds. But they were fundamentally wrong. Their forms, usually shadows given solid, terrifying life, were unstable. They shimmered and flickered, their edges blurring into pixels of black static. One's leg lagged a half-second behind the rest of its body, making it move with a sickening, disjointed gait. Another's head seemed to derez and re-rez every few seconds. They weren't just monsters. They were glitches in the fabric of the world, beings of nightmare whose very existence was now corrupted by the entropic fog. They're trapped between states, Reyna breathed, her warrior's mind trying to process an enemy that didn't obey the basic laws of being. Annabeth didn't hesitate. Her strategic mind took over, falling back on years of training. Okay, standard kill squad tactics. Reyna, with me, we'll use the alleyway across the street as a choke point. Percy, draw them in. She pulled a small, bronze disc from her belt, a Daedalus lure. She activated it, and it began to emit a high-pitched whine and the scent of monster-grade bacon. The glitching hellhounds' heads snapped toward the sound, their distorted growls intensifying. They charged. It was a perfect plan against a normal enemy. But as the first hellhound reached the alley, it didn't enter the choke point. It simply phased. Its body dissolved into a cloud of black pixels, passed directly through the solid brick wall of the building, and began to reform on the other side. Annabeth's jaw dropped. That's not possible. Solid matter. The rules don't apply here, Annabeth. Reyna yelled, already adapting. She charged forward to meet the second hound head-on, her golden gladius a blur. She thrust, a perfect, legion-honed strike aimed at the creature's chest. Her sword went right through it. For an instant, the hellhound's form became intangible, a projection of shadow and static. Reyna's blade met no resistance, throwing her off balance. The creature solidified a moment later, snapping its jaws where her throat had just been. She twisted away, her expression one of utter disbelief. Her disciplined, perfect combat forms were useless against an enemy that could simply choose not to be solid. The pack was on them now, a flickering, phasing nightmare of claws and teeth. Annabeth's Dracon bone sword was having the same issue, her expert lashes and parries slicing through empty air as the creatures blinked in and out of corporeal existence. They were fighting ghosts, and they were losing. Percy watched for a critical 3 seconds. He saw Annabeth's logic failing. He saw Reyna's discipline rendered useless. He saw the old ways, their ways, breaking against this new, incomprehensible threat. The lessons of the scroll, the long, silent hours in his deep-sea forge, coalesced into a single moment of absolute clarity. He had to stop trying to play by the world's broken rules. He had to write his own. Fall back. To me, he commanded. His voice wasn't a shout, but it cut through the chaos with an authority that made both warriors flinch and obey without question. Annabeth and Reyna disengaged, moving to flank him, their backs to his. Percy closed his eyes and took a single, deep breath. He didn't reach for the sea in the pipes below or the humidity in the air around him. He reached for his own center, for the eye of his inner storm. He found that point of perfect stillness, and from it, he let his power flow. It wasn't a violent eruption. It was a sudden, immense pressurization of reality. The air for 100 feet around him grew heavy, charged with a power that was both ancient and new. The thick, white fog was pushed back, dissolving as if burned away by an invisible sun. His eyes snapped open, and they were no longer just sea green. They glowed with an intense, internal cerulean light, the color of a pure, abyssal flame. Faint, intricate lines of the same blue light spread across his skin, tracing RNS like a celestial map of ocean currents. He had entered what the scroll had called Sage Mode, but this was his own version, born of the sea and the storm. A draconic Sage Mode. Annabeth stared, mesmerized and terrified. The sheer, overwhelming presence of him was staggering. It was Percy, but it was as if his soul had expanded to fill the entire street, his power a tangible, crushing weight. He didn't attack the monsters. Not yet. He extended his hands, palms out, and focused his intent. He wasn't targeting the hellhounds. He was targeting the space they occupied. He visualized the street as it should be, the solid asphalt. The unyielding brick of the buildings, the immutable laws of physics that governed reality. He poured his own stable, ordered iicor into the world around him, not as a weapon, but as a bomb. He was reinforcing reality itself. The effect was instantaneous. The flickering streetlights steadied, burning with a clear, unwavering light. The corrupted letters on the distant signs snapped back into crisp, readable text, and the hellhounds, they solidified. Their phasing, glitching forms were locked into place, becoming fully, painfully corporeal. They whimpered, suddenly trapped in a reality that would no longer bend to the chaos that had spawned them. Now, Percy said, his voice a low, resonant hum. He thrust a hand forward. The fire hydrants on both sides of the street exploded. Not with a spray, but with thick, cohesive pillars of water that shot into the air. In the sky above, the water twisted and wove itself into shapes, guided by his silent intent. 2 massive sea dragons, 50 feet long, formed from the churning water. They were not mere puppets of the waves. They were infused with his glowing blue sage energy, their eyes burning with a terrifying, predatory intelligence. They were constructs of his very essence. With a silent command, the dragons descended. They moved with an unnatural, fluid grace, a whirlwind of scales made of compressed water and teeth of hyper-pressurized force. They didn't just attack the hellhounds. They hunted them, herding the pack, cutting off their escape routes, their movements perfectly coordinated. Annabeth, a master strategist, watched in awe. It was a maneuver she would have devised, but he was executing it with a speed and perfection that was beyond any mortal commander. A few hounds broke past the dragons. Percy dealt with them personally. A shield of swirling, compressed water materialized at his side, intercepting a lunging hound and sending it flying. In his other hand, the nearly invisible blade of pressurized water formed. He moved with a speed that blurred the eye, no longer just a brawler but a master of a deadly, elegant art. He didn't hack or slash. He simply moved through the remaining monsters, his blade passing through them without a sound. A moment later, the solidified hellhounds fell to the ground, dissolving not into golden dust, but into harmless pools of black shadow and seawater. From the fog, a new threat emerged, a trio of empusai, their mismatched legs and flaming hair a familiar sight. But they too were warped. Their forms were blurred, as if seen through heat haze. Their movements leaving fading after images that confused the eye. Percy didn't falter. He adapted. He clapped his hands together, and the air grew saturated with a fine, shimmering mist. "Stay behind me," he ordered. The mist, infused with his iicor, clung to the empusai, its stabilizing effect dampening their blur. Their forms became clearer, their after images fading. They shrieked in fury and charged. Percy met them. He didn't use his blade this time. He held his ground, a calm epicenter in a storm of his own making. As the first empusa lunged, he met her with an open palm. A localized, concussive blast of pure force, shaped from the water in the mist, erupted from his hand, shattering her form into a cloud of dust and steam. He was a master of every state of his element, liquid, solid, gas. In less than a minute, it was over. The street was silent again, but it was a clean silence now, not the oppressive quiet of the fraying. The fog had been pushed back for a full city block. The streetlights shone brightly. The remaining monster dust was already being washed away by the water flowing from the broken hydrants, all of it guided by Percy's will into the storm drains, leaving the street clean. He stood in the center of it all, the glowing markings on his skin slowly fading, the cerulean light in his eyes receding back into familiar sea green. The immense pressure of his presence vanished, and he swayed on his feet, the expenditure of energy clearly enormous. He was just Percy again. But he wasn't. Not to the 2 women watching him. Reyna's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated awe. Her Roman mind, built on the ideals of imposing order on a chaotic world, had just witnessed the ultimate expression of that philosophy. He hadn't just won a fight. He had faced down chaos itself and forced it to obey the rules of reality. He hadn't just been a warrior. He had been a lawgiver, a force of absolute order. The respect she held for him, forged over the ocean, now solidified into something harder, brighter, and far more profound. Annabeth, however, was trembling. Her dracon bone sword was heavy in her hand. She stared at the man she loved, the boy she had fallen through Tartarus with, and she saw a stranger. It wasn't the power that scared her. She had always known he was powerful. It was the cold, terrifying precision of it. The glowing eyes, the inhuman grace, the quiet, absolute authority. The impulsive, goofy, hot-headed boy she knew had been replaced by a being of immense, calculating power, who could rewrite the world around him with a gesture. He had saved them. He had won. But Annabeth felt a sudden, terrifying chasm open between them, a gap as wide and as deep as the ocean he now commanded so completely. She looked at Percy, who was now leaning against a lamppost, breathing heavily, and the love in her heart was suddenly tangled with a new, cold strand of fear. They stood in the silent, cleansed street, a victory won. But in the quiet space between the hero and his oldest love, a new and far more complicated battle had just begun. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Council of Unsetting Suns. Victory in the fog-choked street. Reeds of Manhattan did not feel like a triumph. It felt like a verdict. They had won the battle, but the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken consequences, a quiet so profound it was louder than any explosion. For 2 days, the three of them, Percy, Annabeth, and Raina, operated out of a magically sealed suite at the Plaza Hotel, a bubble of borrowed normalcy in a city still recovering its metaphysical senses. The fraying had receded from its epicenter, but its lingering effects were like a concussion on the city's soul. The mortals would remember nothing, their minds patching over the gaps with mundane explanations for the power outages and communication failures. But the demigods knew. The world had a crack in its foundation, and they had only just managed to caulk it with the sheer force of Percy's will. The dynamic between them had fractured and reset into a new, unsettling geometry. Raina was a study in focused efficiency. She treated Percy with a new, formal deference, her questions sharp and tactical. She saw his power as a strategic asset, the ultimate weapon in this new war, and her mind was entirely bent on how to best deploy it. She was the general who had just been handed a new kind of army. And her awe was channeled into pragmatism. She spoke to him not as an old acquaintance, but as an equal, a fellow sovereign power whose borders and capabilities she was carefully, respectfully, mapping. Annabeth was the opposite. She was a whirlwind of frantic, intellectual energy, her fear sublimated into a desperate need to understand. She filled notebooks with observations, attempting to deconstruct Percy's power, to give it a name, a classification, a place within their known world of divine mechanics. She'd ask him questions that were both brilliant and hopelessly inadequate. Was the iicor infusion endothermic or exothermic? When you reinforced the street, were you manipulating quantum probability or imposing a localized Geller field of absolute reality? Her words were a shield, a way of reducing the terrifying, magnificent stranger he had become into a set of observable phenomena she could control. But beneath the academic rigor, Percy could see the hurt in her eyes. The boy she knew, the one whose hand she had held through the literal hell of Tartarus, had been overridden by a man who spoke of intent and inner stillness, a language she did not understand. A chasm had opened between them, and she was trying to build a bridge of logic and reason across it, terrified she might fall. And Percy was an island. He felt the distance from Annabeth like a physical ache. He saw the awe in Raina's eyes and knew it was for the Dragon King, not for the son of Sally Jackson. He spent hours in a meditative state, not just to recover his energy, but to acclimate to the sheer scale of his new senses. In his sage mode, he had felt the life force of every person in a 5-block radius, the slow, patient existence of the ancient bedrock beneath the city, the frantic, scurrying lives of the rats in the subway. He had touched the city's soul. Coming down from that was like being forced back into a cage. He was gentle, patient, answering Annabeth's questions as best he could. But he knew the words were failing. How do you describe the color blue to someone who has never seen the sky? The summons arrived on the third morning, delivered not by Hermes or Iris, but by an impossible creature that materialized in the center of their suite. It was a crane, a magnificent bird of pristine white feathers and a blood-red crown, but it was forged from what looked like living, breathing paper. It unfolded itself from a single, intricate piece of origami, bowed its head with an unnervingly human intelligence, and spoke. Its voice was not a sound, but a series of chiming notes that translated directly into their minds, a melody of pure meaning. The august personage, the heaven-illuminating great deity, Amaterasu Omikami, requests the presence of the children of the West at a council of mutual concern. The encroaching silence is a blight upon the land of the reed plains as it is upon your own. A neutral ground has been prepared. He children of the storm and of wisdom are welcome. The Lord of the Sea's maelstrom is awaited. The paper crane bowed again, then folded itself back into a complex, flat shape, which drifted to the floor. Reyna picked it up. On one side was an intricate map of the Pacific Ocean, a single, previously uncharted island glowing with a soft, golden light. On the other was a single, elegant brushstroke character. What was that? Annabeth breathed, her mind racing to place the creature in her encyclopedic knowledge of Greek myth. A Stymphalian bird, a magical construct. It was a shikigami, Percy said, his voice quiet. The knowledge had come to him from the scroll, which had mentioned other worlds, other pantheons. A servant spirit, paper given life and purpose through spiritual energy. The Shinto pantheon, Reyna stated, her eyes fixed on the origami map. The gods of Japan, they're making a move. The silence, it's what they call the fraying. Annabeth looked from the paper to Percy. The crane mentioned you specifically. The Lord of the Sea's maelstrom. They know. But how? A power like the one I used in the street. It doesn't go unnoticed, Percy said, his gaze distant. It sends ripples through the world, on every level. They didn't just see it. They felt it. He looked at them, his expression serious. We have to go. This isn't just our fight anymore. The island did not appear on any map. Mortal or magical. It existed in a pocket of reality tucked neatly into the folds of the Pacific, a place that could only be found if you already knew it was there. They traveled on a wave shaped by Percy, a journey that was silent and breathtakingly fast. One moment, they were surrounded by the endless, churning blue of the open ocean. The next, the island rose from the sea to meet them. Shrouded in a mist that smelled of cherry blossoms and cold, clean stone. It was a masterpiece of impossible harmony. The western shore, where they landed, was built from white marble and celestial bronze. Featuring Doric columns interwoven with living olive trees and a perfectly constructed Roman amphitheater overlooking the sea. But as they walked inland, the architecture seamlessly blended. The marble giving way to gracefully curved dark wood, the bronze replaced by stone lanterns covered in soft, green moss. The path took them through a perfectly raked zengar den where smooth gray river stones flowed around a bubbling Greek spring. They crossed a red lacquered bridge that arched over a stream where Roman naiads swam playfully alongside brightly colored koi fish. The air was a fusion of scents. The salt of the Aegean, the dry herbs of the Roman hills, the damp earth of a Japanese forest, the delicate fragrance of blossoms. The island was a physical embodiment of a diplomatic truce. A place where two vastly different cultures met in a breathtaking, fragile balance. Waiting for them at the center of the island, before a structure that was half Parthenon, half Shinto shrine, was a host of beings who radiated an ancient and formidable power. At their center stood a woman of such regal beauty that she seemed to be the source of the island's light. This was Amaterasu, the sun goddess. She wore a kimono of woven sunlight, and her long black hair was held in place by combs of polished gold. Her face was serene, but her eyes held the fierce, unforgiving heat of a star. To her right stood a powerfully built man with a wild, dark beard and eyes that crackled with the untamed energy of a thunderstorm. He carried no weapon, but his very presence felt like a drawn sword. Susanoo no Makoto, the god of storms and the sea, his domain a turbulent echo of Poseidon's own. He watched Percy with a challenging, analytical gaze. Surrounding them were other figures, kami, as the scroll had named them, of wind, of mountains, of rivers. They were proud, reserved, and their collective power made the air thrum. But Percy's attention was drawn to a young Wong, and standing slightly apart from the gods, at the foot of the shrine's steps. She wore the traditional white and red garments of a miko, a shrine maiden. Her hair was a sheet of glossy black silk, tied back with a simple white ribbon. Her face was pale and composed, her posture one of deep, ingrained reverence. But her eyes were extraordinary. They were a deep, dark brown, but they held a clarity that seemed to see past the physical, to perceive the energy flowing beneath the surface of the world. As she looked at Percy, her composure broke for a fraction of a second. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with profound, unadulterated recognition. It was the look of an astronomer who had spent her entire life studying ancient texts describing a theoretical star, only to look through a telescope one night and find it burning in the heavens exactly where the texts predicted it would be. The sun goddess, Amaterasu, stepped forward. Her voice was like the warmth of the dawn, beautiful but with an underlying, unyielding power. You are welcome, children of the West. I am Amaterasu Omikami. We have watched your world flicker, as our own has fallen silent. It is time to speak. Reina, ever the diplomat and praetor, stepped forward to respond, her voice clear and formal. I am Reina, daughter of Bellona, praetor of the 12th Legion of New Rome. We thank you for this meeting. The threat you call the silence, we call the fraying. It is an honor to stand before the revered kami of this land. Amaterasu inclined her head, a gesture of regal acknowledgement. Then, her gaze, as hot and as focused as a sunbeam, fell on Percy. And you are the one whose coming was felt like a tidal wave against the shores of our spirit world. The demigod who wields a power that is not born of his pantheon. Percy met her gaze without flinching. He felt the goddess's immense pressure, the weight of her authority, testing him. But he was anchored by the point of stillness within himself. He was no longer just a demigod to be intimidated. I am Percy Jackson, he said, his voice calm and even. Son of Poseidon. A low, rumbling chuckle came from the storm god. A son of the western sea god, Susano said. His voice a tempest's growl. He took a step forward, his crackling energy washing over them. Yet the power you wield feels less of the stagnant deep and more of the raging, creative heart of the storm. It feels familiar. His eyes narrowed on Percy, a flicker of some ancient, divine rivalry in their depths. Before the tension could escalate, the young Miko stepped forward, bowing deeply to Amaterasu. Then to the guests. Forgive my impertinence, great kami, honored guests. I am Akari Tanaka, daughter of Susano no Makoto, and servant of this shrine. She rose, and her clear, intelligent gaze fell on Percy. The energy you command, Percy-san, she said, her voice soft but resonant, it is not the borrowed power of a divine parent. It is ki, life force, refine, and molded by a will of impossible clarity. It is the foundation of our world's Jiboshin, our own Earth Mother power, and the substance of all creation. I have never seen it wielded with such purity by one not of the celestial planes. Her words cut through the tension, replacing it with a stunned silence. She had not only recognized his power, she had given it a name from their own cosmology, say, aimlessly integrating his impossible nature into their reality. She had built a bridge between their two worlds with a single observation. Annabeth stared at Akari, her mind firing on all cylinders. Ki, life force. It was a concept she had read about in mortal books on Eastern philosophy, but had always dismissed as metaphor. But this woman, this demigod Miko, spoke of it as a fundamental, quantifiable substance. A new variable in the equation, a new piece of the puzzle. Her intellectual curiosity warred with a sharp, sudden pang of something she refused to name. Akari understood Percy in a way she, his oldest friend and partner, could not. The council convened within the shrine, a grand, open-air hall of fragrant cedar wood. The negotiations were a masterclass in political brinkmanship. Amaterasu was a shrewd and cautious leader. She spoke of the silence as a spiritual blight, a decay that was causing lesser kami to fade from existence, prayers to go unanswered, and sacred places to lose their power. She was wary of the Western gods, and with good reason. Your pantheon's history is one of conflict and interference, she said, her calm voice laced with steel. You move through the mortal world like a careless storm, leaving chaos in your wake. How can we be sure that this fraying is not a consequence of your own wars? Annabeth, the daughter of Athena, took the lead in the defense. She spoke brilliantly, laying out the timeline of the giant war, of Gaia's defeat, and the subsequent appearance of the fraying. She argued with logic, with historical precedent, with strategic analysis. She was magnificent, but the kami were not moved by Greek logic. Theirs was a world of spiritual balance, of intuition, and of honor. It was Reina, the Roman, who found common ground. She spoke not of strategy, but of duty, of the sacred responsibility to protect the mortal world, a world they all shared. She spoke of the legion's sacrifice, of the centuries they had stood as a bulwark against chaos. Her words resonated with the kami's own sense of honor and tradition. But the impasse remained. The Shinto gods would not commit their power to a foreign war without absolute proof. That the threat was universal and that their prospective allies were trustworthy. Finally, Susanoo turned his stormy gaze back to Percy, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings. "You have been quiet, Maelstrom." The storm god rumbled. "You sit as if you are judging us all. You wear the power of a king, yet you have not spoken. What is your purpose in this?" Percy met his gaze. He slowly rose to his feet. The energy in the room shifted, focusing on him. He wasn't the fidgety, wise-cracking Percy Jackson anymore. He was the man who had stared down chaos and made it blink. "I am not here to beg for an alliance," Percy said, his voice echoing with a quiet, unshakable authority that made the ancient gods in the room sit up straighter. "I am not here as a representative of Olympus. The gods did not send me. The fraying did. This is a threat to the foundation of our worlds. Not just our people, but the very idea of our existence. Your silence and our fraying are two symptoms of the same disease. Reality is dying." He turned his gaze to Amaterasu. "You ask for trust, but trust is not given, it is earned. You are right to be wary of the Olympians. Their power is often used carelessly. But the power I wield is not theirs. It is mine, and I am not here to ask for your help in a war. I am here to offer my help in healing the world." He then looked at Akari, a silent question in his eyes. She understood immediately and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards a corner of the shrine's sacred garden. In that corner, the vibrant green moss was dull and gray. The leaves on a bonsai maple were curled and brittle, and the small stone lantern at its center felt cold and dead to the spiritual senses. It was a patch of earth that had been touched by the silence. Without another word, Percy walked from the hall into the garden, the entire council following. He knelt beside the blighted patch of ground. He didn't begin a grand ritual. He simply placed his hand on the dead moss. He closed his eyes, and the air around him grew heavy with his power. The cerulean light of his sage mode bloomed, not as a flash, but as a gentle, spreading dawn. The glowing lines traced across his skin. This time, however, there was no menace, no crushing pressure. The power that emanated from him was warm, gentle, and overwhelmingly alive. Akari's breath caught in her throat. She could see it. She could see the pure, golden-white ki flowing from Percy's palm into the earth. It wasn't a flood. It was a careful, deliberate infusion. He was feeling the withered life force of the plants, the cold stillness of the earth, and he was feeding it, nurturing it, filament by delicate filament. He was weaving life back into the land. The gray moss began to regain its color, a wave of vibrant green spreading out from his fingertips. The brittle leaves of the maple uncurled, their veins filling with new life. The cold stone of the lantern began to glow with a soft, internal warmth, as the dormant kami spirit within it awakened from its blighted slumber. He wasn't just healing the symptoms, he was repairing the damage at a fundamental, conceptual level. He was reminding the earth how to be earth. When he was finished, he removed his hand. The patch of garden was not just healed, it was more vibrant, more alive, than the rest of the shrine's grounds. The air around it hummed with a clean, potent spiritual energy. The feat was quiet, creative, and utterly, impossibly, beyond the power of any kami in attendance. They could purify, they could bless, but they could not see. Create life from the ashes of its absence. Percy rose, the sage light fading from him. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear and steady. He had made his statement. The silence that followed was absolute. The kami stared at the healed earth, then at the demigod who stood before them, and they understood. He was not a weapon to be deployed. He was not a demigod begging for aid. He was a force of creation in a world threatened by entropy. He was the only true answer to the fraying they had ever seen. Amaterasu slowly rose from her seat, her face a mask of profound, regal contemplation. She descended the steps and stood before Percy. "You are correct, Percy Jackson," she said, her voice filled with a new, deep respect. "This is not an Olympian war. This is a war for existence. And you are not a hero seeking an alliance." She paused, her stellar gaze sweeping over Annabeth and Reyna before returning to him. "You are a king seeking allies. You will have them." She then turned to the Miko. "Akari, My son's daughter, your sight is the keenest among us. You understand the nature of this maelstrom. You will go with them. Be our eyes, our voice, and our bridge. Ensure that the balance we forge today holds true. Akari bowed, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. It will be my honor, great Kami. An alliance had been forged. But as Percy met Akari's gaze, a gaze of pure, intellectual, and spiritual understanding, he felt the chasm between himself and Annabeth widen just a little bit more. And he saw in Reina's eyes that her calculus had changed. She was no longer just assessing a new weapon. She was assessing a new world order. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Silent Grove. The journey from the council was a study in charged silence. They traveled east across the vast, breathing expanse of the Pacific, the magically forged island of the council shrinking behind them until it was a memory of impossible diplomacy. Percy once again shaped the sea into a vessel for their passage, a sleek, hydrodynamic whisper of water and will that skimmed the waves, leaving almost no wake. The raw, untamed power of the ocean was a comfort to him, a familiar langua. In a world that was becoming increasingly alien. But within the small, self-contained world of their group, a new and complex language was being born, and no one was yet fluent. Akari Tanaka was a presence of quiet, profound observation. She sat near the front of the water construct, her Miko robes unstirred by the wind, her posture one of perfect meditative stillness. Yet her eyes were constantly moving, not watching the sea, but seeming to perceive the invisible currents of energy that flowed around them, the kai of the wind, the life force of a distant pod of whales, the immense, sleeping power of the planet's magnetic field. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were precise, offering insights that reframed their entire understanding of the enemy. The fraying, the silence, it is not an army that marches. She explained, her voice as soft as the rustle of silk. It is a parasite. It seeks nourishment. It is drawn to the brightest flames, the deepest wells of life, Bako. Say that is where the most potent energy resides. Annabeth, ever the pragmatist, was processing this new information with a fierce, almost desperate, intensity. She had her remaining functional table, a hardened celestial bronze model, propped on her knee, her fingers flying across its surface as she attempted to build a new strategic model. She integrated Akari's spiritual terminology as if it were a new branch of physics, labeling variables as key density and spiritual blight vectors. She was trying to impose her brand of logical order on a foe that operated on the principles of a nightmare. And the strain was visible in the tight line of her jaw. She treated Akari with a professional, academic respect, but a current of tension flowed between them. It was the friction between the iicor who designs the temple and the priestess who understands its god. Reina, seated near the stern, was the picture of Roman discipline. She sharpened her imperial gold gladius with a whetstone, rhythmic scrape a counterpoint to the rush of the waves. She accepted Akari's presence as she would a new legionary commander from an allied force, with professional courtesy and a watchful eye. Her focus was entirely on the practical application of this new intelligence. So we are not looking for its source, Reina surmised, her gaze fixed on the horizon. We are looking for its targets. The biggest, oldest sources of life in the world. It was this conclusion that led to the frantic iris message from Grover. His face, usually a picture of cheerful anxiety, was haggard, his goat-like eyes wide with a shared, empathic pain. The message shimmered in the sea spray before them, a window into a world of natural agony. Percy, the great lament, I'm hearing it, he stammered, his voice cracking. It's not just the dryads at camp anymore. It's coming from the old places, the deep woods. The elders are singing a dirge. A song of grayness, of silence. He explained that the most powerful satyrs across the globe, the ones attuned to the oldest parts of the wild, were all reporting the same thing. A slow, creeping death, a leeching of vitality from the world's most sacred natural places. He pinpointed the loudest, most agonizing point of this lament, a place so ancient that it was a myth even to the satyrs. The Grove of Whispering Aeons, located somewhere in the vast, temperate Rainef forests of what mortals now called British Columbia. Akari, who had been listening intently, closed her eyes. He is right, she whispered. I can feel the thread of its hunger leading there. It is a place of immense key. A feast. Percy altered their course. The effortless glide of their watercraft turned into a determined surge, the destination now clear. They were no longer hunting a monster. They were racing to save a god. To say they arrived at a forest would be an understatement. They arrived at the memory of a world before humanity, an Eden forged from deep time and forgotten magic. The trees were not merely large. They were titans of bark and leaf, their colossal trunks broader than houses, their canopies so high they formed their own cloud-dappled sky. Sunlight, when it pierced the dense foliage, did so in great cathedral-like shafts of golden green light. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, of a million years of fallen leaves, and of flowers that bloomed with soft, eternal luminescence. Strange, beautiful creatures, stags with antlers of living silver, birds whose songs were complex, multi-layered harmonies, moved through the undergrowth. A stream, its water glowing with a soft golden light, wound its way through the grove, its murmuring a constant, gentle song. This was not a place on the earth, it was a piece of the earth's primordial, untainted soul. And it was dying. The decay was insidious, a creeping negation that started at the edges of the grove and worked its way inward. It was not a rot or a blight. It was an absence. The vibrant, Cybele greens of the foliage faded at the periphery into a dull, listless gray. The glowing flowers closer to the edge were dark, their petals withered and colorless. The symphony of the birdsong became fainter and fainter the deeper they walked, until it was replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence that felt like a physical weight on their ears. The golden, life-giving stream ran clear at the grove's heart. But as they traced it outwards, its light dimmed, the water becoming plain, empty, and spiritually dead. Reyna drew her sword, her posture immediately shifting into a defensive crouch. "This feels tactically unsound," she muttered, her warrior's senses screaming at the profound wrongness of the place. "It's like the void spots in New Rome, but alive. And growing." Annabeth knelt, running her hand over a patch of moss that was in the process of fading from green to gray. "There's no biological agent, no poison. The cellular structure is intact. It's just giving up. The will to live is being erased." She looked up, her gray eyes filled with a kind of intellectual horror. "How do you fight that?" Akari stood with her eyes closed, one hand resting on the trunk of one of the colossal trees. She was trembling slightly, and her face was pale. "The pain," she whispered. "The key of this place, it's being siphoned away. It's the spiritual equivalent of bleeding to death. The grove is weeping, but it has forgotten the sound of its own sorrow." Percy felt it most keenly of all. His life force, the sea storm in his blood, resonated with the grove. He could feel the vibrant, thrumming heart of the place, a majestic, ancient life force, but he could also feel the tendrils of the fraying, like invisible, parasitic leeches, latched onto it, drinking it dry. The slow, agonizing drain was an echo of his own deepest fears, of the soul-crushing despair of Tartarus. As they reached the heart of the grove, a clearing where the largest and most ancient of the trees stood, a figure coalesced from the dappled light and swirling leaves. It was a woman, but her form was woven from the very essence of the grove. Her skin had the texture of smooth, pale bark, her hair was a cascade of willow leaves and luminous moss. And her eyes were two pools of liquid amber. She was beautiful, but it was the ancient, elemental beauty of a mountain range or a storm-tossed sea. Her form, however, was unstable. It flickered, parts of her becoming translucent, her edges blurring like a fading photograph. She was the grove's heart, its dryad, and her life was fading with it. "You do not belong here," a voice whispered. Not in their ears, but in their minds. The voice was not made of words, but of the rustling of a billion leaves, the creaking of ancient boughs, the sigh of the wind. It was a voice of immense age and profound weariness. "We came to help," Annabeth said, taking a cautious step forward. "We are fighting the silence that is killing your home." The dryad's amber eyes, filled with an ancient, non-human wisdom, fixed on Annabeth, then Reyna, then Akari. But when her gaze fell upon Percy, she recoiled. Her translucent form flickered violently, and a wave of pure, primal fear washed over the clearing. "Another one," her thought voice whispered, laced with terror. "Another storm. One silence comes to drink the world's life. Now another comes to break what is left." Percy was taken aback. "I'm not here to hurt you. Your power," she projected, and the ancient trees around them groaned in sympathetic fear. "It is a maelstrom, a hurricane bound in flesh. It screams where all else is quiet. It is a presence as loud, as absolute, as the silence you claim to fight. To a river, the flood and the drought are but two different faces of destruction. You are the flood. You will wash away what little remains." Her perspective was so alien, so deeply rooted in the slow, patient balance of the natural world, that Percy's power, the very thing he intended to use to save her, felt like another form of violation. To her, the immense, concentrated ki he radiated was as unnatural and overwhelming as the fraying's absolute void. He was a second cataclysm, a different flavor of apocalypse. "He is a creator," Akari said gently, stepping forward and bowing her head to the ancient spirit. "Venerable Mother of the Grove. His power is that of Genesis, not of destruction. It is the counter-song to the silence." Words, the Dryad's voice sighed, filled with the cynicism of millennia. "The Sky Fathers and Earth Mothers of every pantheon have come to my grove. They spoke of protection and balance. And they waged their wars in my branches and poisoned my streams with their iicor. Your words are but wind. I feel his power. It is not of this world. It is too much." She was fading faster now, her fear and despair accelerating the decay. Percy knew that logic and debate were useless. He was trying to reason with a being that was the living embodiment of the grove's soul. He couldn't tell her he was different. He had to show her. "Stay back," he said softly to his companions. He walked slowly, deliberately, toward the ancient, central tree, the heart of Grove and the source of the Dryad's being. She flickered away from him, her fear a palpable cold in the air. He stopped before the colossal trunk, its bark gray and cracked, its life force a faint, fading ember. He looked at the Dryad, whose name he did not know but whose pain he felt as his own. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I know this will feel like a storm. But just for a moment, try to feel the rain." He placed his hands flat against the rough bark. He closed his eyes and let go. From Lelia's perspective, for that was her name, a name sung only by the wind and the stars, it was the end. The maelstrom she had feared was unleashed. An explosion of power, so vast and so potent, slammed into her senses, 1,000 times brighter than the silence was dark. Her first instinct was to flee, to dissolve, to let the coming oblivion take her. But then, she felt it. The nature of the power. It was not a destructive, chaotic force. It was structured, harmonic, and filled with an overwhelming, undeniable intent. It was the intent of life itself. Percy entered his draconic sage mode, the cerulean light blooming under his skin. But he did not draw power in, he pushed it out. He connected his own life force, his inner sea, to the dying root system of the grove. He felt the grove's song, its ancient life hymn, which had faded to a single, weak, discordant note. He didn't try to overwhelm it. He began to hum a counter-melody with his own iicor, a harmony of pure, creative energy that supported the dying note, strengthened it, and began to weave new verses around it. It was an act of Genesis. The healing began at his touch and spread like a sunrise. The gray, cracked bark of the ancient tree softened, the color returning, a wave of rich, healthy brown spreading up its trunk. Lelia gasped as she felt that life flow directly into her own form. Her flickering slowed, steadied, and solidified. From the central tree, the wave of creation pulsed outwards rough the grove's interconnected root system. The gray moss at the forest floor exploded into 100 shades of impossible green. The withered, colorless flowers bloomed in an instantaneous, breathtaking riot of color, their petals unfurling to release a perfume of renewed life. The silence was the first casualty. A low hum started, the buzz of insects returning. Then the rustle of a million leaves, all unfurling to their full, healthy vibrancy. The stream's dull water began to glow, the golden light returning, and its gentle murmur rose into a joyful, bubbling song. Finally, the birds. A single, clear note, then another. Then 1,000, a jubilant chorus that celebrated the death of silence. Lelia watched, tears like pure, clear morning dew tracing paths down her bark-like skin. She felt Percy's energy not as a flood, but as a perfect, gentle rain, seeping into every dry and wounded part of her soul, of her world. She felt his intent not as a command, but as an offering. An act of profound, unconditional love for the very concept of life. He was not healing her grove. He was reminding it of its own perfection. He was loving it back into existence. When the last gray leaf had turned a vibrant green, Percy pulled his hands back from the tree. The sage mode light faded, leaving him leaning against the trunk, exhausted but smiling. The grove was not just healed. It was hyper-alive, thrumming with a power and vitality it hadn't known in centuries. Lelia solidified completely. Her form was now vibrant, her leaf hair a lustrous green, her amber eyes glowing with warmth and life. She was more real than she had ever been. The fear was gone, replaced by reverence so complete, so elemental, it was a form of love. She glided towards him, her feet not touching the ground. She reached out and gently took his hand, the one that had rested on her tree. Percy felt the connection instantly. It was not a thought, or a word. It was the entire, ancient, vast consciousness of the grove pouring its gratitude. Its loyalty, its very being into him through her touch. He felt the slow, patient life of the trees, the frantic joy of the nesting birds, the cool clarity of the flowing stream. He had healed the grove, and now the grove was healing him, pouring its clean, boundless natural energy back into him, replenishing what he had spent. A bond was forged, deeper than any oath. A symbiotic connection between the maelstrom and the grove. He was her protector, and she was his sanctuary. Annabeth, Reyna, and Akari watched in silence. They had just witnessed a miracle, an act of creation that bordered on true divinity. Annabeth's notebooks and theories seemed like children's toys in the face of such a feat. Reyna's understanding of power had been shattered and remade. Akari simply bowed her head, recognizing a force that was in perfect, awesome harmony with the world. A new ally had been gained, one whose power was as ancient and as deep as the earth itself. And she now stood at Percy's side, her hand in his, looking at him as if he were the sun that had just ended 1,000 years of night. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Hunter's Gaze. The rain was a jailer. It fell in a ceaseless, silver-gray torrent, turning the ancient forest of the Pacific Northwest into a labyrinth of slick, black bark and treacherous, sucking mud. Every leaf on every fern dripped, every branch wept, and the air itself felt like a heavy, waterlogged shroud. To Talia Grace, lieutenant of the Hunters of Artemis, the constant, percussive drumming of the downpour was the sound of a closing trap. For 10 days, she and her sisters had been the hunters. Now, shivering and exhausted in the meager shelter of a rocky overhang, she had the sinking feeling they had become the prey. Their quarry was a chimera, or what had once been a chimera. The initial reports had been standard enough for a C-class threat. But the creature they found was nothing like the ones described in the old texts. It was a monster that had been broken and remade by the fraying. A living glitch in the world's code. Anything. Talia's voice was a harsh whisper, barely audible over the deluge. Phoebe, her most experienced tracker, shook her head, water dripping from her silver circlet. Nothing. The tracks vanish every few hundred yards. It's like it just stops existing and starts again somewhere else. The hunt had been a nightmare of escalating impossibilities. The beast's 3 heads were not merely a physical threat, they were conceptual weapons. The lion's head did not just roar, it shed a wave of sound that caused the world to stutter, making trees flicker and the ground beneath their feet feel momentarily intangible. The goat's head breathed not fire, but a shimmering haze of pure fraying. A wave of entropy that didn't burn the forest but caused it to flicker and gray, the life force momentarily erased. And the serpent's tail, a viper of shimmering static, bit with a venom that didn't poison the body, but the mind, causing a dizzying, temporary amnesia that made a hunter forget her name, her mission, even how to knock an arrow. Worse, it was unkillable by their methods. Their silver arrows, blessed by Artemis herself, should have been lethal. Instead, when they found their mark, the chimera's form would fracture. The arrow would pass through, and the single beast would split into 3, 5, sometimes a dozen semi-real, translucent copies of itself. These fractal predators would fade and solidify at random, their attacks coming from all directions at once, only to merge back into a single, infuriatingly whole creature moments later. And the rain, the miserable, endless rain, seemed to heal it, its corrupted form knitting back together under the downpour as If the water itself was a part of its unholy regeneration, they were being worn down, physically and spiritually. 3 of her hunters were huddled under oilskin tarps, shivering with a chill that was more than just the cold. Their eyes still holding a faint confusion from the serpent's bite. Talia herself felt a deep, gnawing exhaustion. She had tried to end it, to call upon the power of her father. She had raised her spear to the roiling, pregnant clouds and screamed his name, channeling her rage and fear into a spear of lightning. A bolt had answered her call, a jagged fork of brilliant white, but as it neared the chimera, it had seemed to bend, to fray at the edges, before grounding itself harmlessly into a nearby cedar tree. The fraying around the monster was so intense it was disrupting her divine connection. Here, in this dark, wet corner of the world, against this impossible foe, the daughter of Zeus was just a demigod, and it was not enough. The feeling of that connection ling out had been the purest terror she had felt since the pine tree. "It's cornering us," she stated, her knuckles white where she gripped her spear. "It's been herding us toward this canyon for the last day, forcing us into a dead end." Quote, it was true. The forest behind them was too open, too easy for the creature to flank them with its fractal copies. The narrow, rocky canyon ahead was their only defensible option, but it was also a perfect kill box. A low growl, distorted and skipping, echoed from the trees around them. It was closing in. "Positions," Talia commanded, her voice betraying none of the cold dread coiling in her gut. Her hunters moved with the fluid, silent grace of their calling, melting into the shadows of the rocks, arrows nocked, faces set in grim determination. They would die here, if they had to. But they would die fighting. As the first shimmering, unstable form of the chimera began to coalesce at the canyon's mouth, a new sound cut through the rain. It was not the sound of a monster, nor of the storm. It was the sound of a waterfall where no waterfall should be. From the sheer rock face of the canyon wall, a curtain of water, impossibly clean and glowing with a soft, golden light, began to pour. It parted like a theater curtain, and from the shimmering portal within the rock, 4 figures stepped out into the mud and the rain. Talia's heart nearly stopped. The first figure was unmistakable, even after all this time. Taller, broader, his familiar, chaotic black hair plastered to his head by the rain. But it was the way he stood, a point of absolute calm stillness in the raging storm, that was so different. Percy Jackson. With him were 3 women. One was clearly a warrior, a Roman by her bearing and armor, her purple cloak dark with rain, her eyes sweeping the area with the tactical assessment of a commander. The second was a daughter of Athena. Talia knew her on sight, her blonde hair escaping its braid, her gray eyes already analyzing the terrain, the monster, the situation, with a terrifying intellectual velocity. And the third was a stranger, a young woman in the pristine robes of a Miko, who seemed utterly untouched by the grime and the rain. Her presence a pool of serene calm in the middle of the desperate fight. Percy's sea-green eyes, deeper and more ancient than she remembered, found hers. A ghost of his old, lopsided grin touched his lips. "Hey, Talia, looks like you're having a party. Didn't want to invite your favorite cousin." The tension of the moment, the years of distance, the presence of the other it all evaporated in a flash of their old, familiar dynamic. "Get stuffed, Jackson," she shot back, a wave of profound, illogical relief washing over her. "I had it under control. We were just tenderizing it for the kill." The fractal chimera, momentarily confused by the newcomers, chose that moment to roar. The world stuttered. The light seemed to skip a frame, and the sound of the rain momentarily vanished, replaced by a deafening static. Percy didn't even flinch. His gaze hardened, the faint amusement replaced by a focus so intense it was like a physical force. Annabeth, Reyna, defensive perimeter with the hunters. Akari, analysis. "What is that thing?" "It is not a creature anymore," the Miko said, her voice impossibly calm as she looked upon the glitching horror. "It is a wound in the world, trying to imitate a memory of a monster. Its existence is conditional. The rain feeds its instability. To kill it, we must first make it real." Talia stared at her. In one sentence, strange priestess had articulated the entire strategic problem with more clarity than Talia had managed in 10 days. "Make it real," Percy repeated, nodding as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. He turned to Talia, his eyes locking with hers. He wasn't asking for permission, he was conscripting a fellow commander. Your hunters know this terrain. Annabeth and Reyna will help them fortify this canyon. We're going to turn their trap into ours. Talia found herself nodding, a part of her bristling at being given orders, but the larger, more pragmatic part of her recognizing the flawless, immediate logic of his command. She had been on the defensive, reacting. He had arrived and was already dictating the terms of the engagement. What followed was a whirlwind of perfectly coordinated, multidisciplinary action. Talia, barking orders, directed her hunters, who moved with renewed purpose. They were no longer just hiding, they were preparing an ambush. They pointed out the weak points in the canyon walls, the best sightlines, the most stable ground. Reyna was a force of nature. With a few sharp commands, she took a cohort of hunters and began changing the battlefield. Stomping her foot, she'd cause the earth to rise, creating a low wall of cover. A slash of her gladius through the mud would create a deep, treacherous trench. She was not just fighting on the terrain, she was rewriting it. Turning the kill box into an inescapable prison. Annabeth was the plan's architect. She moved between the groups, her mind a whirlwind of angles and possibilities. She directed the placement of a series of celestial bronze tripwires, not to harm the beast, but to funnel it. She pointed out a precariously balanced rock formation high on the canyon wall, devising a way to bring it down to block the exit at the perfect moment. She was a grandmaster, seeing the entire chessboard while everyone else was just looking at the pieces. And then there was Ikari. Talia watched, fascinated, as the Miko moved with a serene, ritualistic grace that was the antithesis of the bottle's chaos. She produced a series of ofuda, white paper talismans covered in elegant, flowing calligraphy. She moved to key points around the perimeter of their newly formed trap, pressing a talisman against the rock or a tree trunk. With each placement, she would murmur a short, resonant chant. Talia couldn't understand the words, but she could feel the effect. A subtle shift in the air, a quiet hum of power. Ikari wasn't laying a trap of bronze and stone. She was weaving a net of pure order in a world of chaos. Throughout it all, Percy stood at the center, the calm eye of their preparatory storm. He didn't micromanage. He gave his commanders their objectives and trusted in their competence. Talia found herself watching him. This wasn't the goofy, impulsive kelp head she had sparred with and argued with for years. This was a leader, confident and absolute, who inspired a terrifying level of competence in the powerful women who followed him. He saw Reyna, a praetor of Rome, and Annabeth, the greatest strategist of their generation, not as his subordinates, but as essential, powerful pieces of a greater whole. He wasn't a hero fighting with his friends. He was a king marshalling his council of war. When everything was ready, the canyon had been transformed. It was a death trap, a layered system of physical barriers and spiritual anchors. It's done, Ikari said, returning to Percy's side. The anchor array is set. When the creature enters the perimeter, it will find the reality within far less pliable. Percy nodded, then turned to Talia. The full force of his new, intense presence fell upon her. Talia, all of this is just to hold it down. To make it real. You and we're the hammer. I need your lightning. She bristled slightly at the word, need, but a deeper part of her thrilled to it. He was acknowledging her power, the power of the sky, as an essential component. He wasn't just taking over. He was asking her to stand with him. You'll get it, Jackson. Lure it in, Percy commanded. A hunter fired a single whistling arrow into the woods. The distorted roar answered, and the fractal chimera, sensing its prey was cornered, stalked into the canyon. The moment its lead paw crossed the invisible threshold of Ikari's seals, the creature shrieked. The dozen or so shimmering, translucent copies it had surrounded itself with were violently snapped back into the primary body. Its form, once glitching and unstable, solidified with a horrifying, fleshy finality. It was suddenly, terrifyingly real, and it was trapped. Annabeth gave the signal. The rockfall was triggered, and tons of stone crashed down, sealing the canyon exit. The chimera was caged. It roared in fury, a pure, solid sound now, and charged. Percy turned to Talia, and for the first time, she saw the full extent of what he had become. Ready, Sparky. He didn't wait for an answer. He took a deep breath. And the storm that had been their jailer became his weapon. The rain did not stop. It intensified 100-fold, but now it swirled with a clear, directed purpose. The wind, which had been a low moan, rose to a deafening, piercing shriek, a solid wall of force that he shaped and directed. He entered his sage mode. The cerulean light bloomed under his skin, and the cruising pressure of his power washed over the canyon. Talia, standing right beside him, felt it erupt, but it didn't harm her. It flowed around her, shielding her, a protective bubble of absolute control. In the heart of a maelstrom he was creating. This close, she could see the glowing, intricate markings on his skin, the abyssal, ancient light in his eyes. It was the face of a god she did not know. Now, he yelled over the din of his own storm. Talia raised her spear and screamed her father's name, not as a desperate plea, but as a warrior's challenge. She poured all her fear, all her frustration, and all her wild, untamed spirit into that call. The sky answered. A bolt of lightning, thicker and brighter than any she had ever summoned, tore through the clouds, a jagged spear of pure, divine energy aimed at the heart of the caged monster. At the exact same instant, Percy thrust his hands forward. He gathered the howling wind and the torrential rain, shaping them into a colossal, swirling vortex of liquid blades. A contained hurricane aimed at the same target. Sky and sea, lightning and water, the two fundamental, rival forces of their world struck as one. The impact was an apocalypse in miniature. The chimera was engulfed, its roar of fury turning into a shriek of dissolution. Talia's lightning electrocuted and flash boiled the very water that Percy was using to slice it apart. The combined elemental fury didn't just destroy the monster's physical form, it scoured away its corrupted, frayed essence, purifying the very space it had occupied. The light was blinding, the sound a physical blow. Then, silence. The wind died. The rain softened to a gentle drizzle. The unnatural pressure vanished. Percy's sage light faded, leaving him breathing heavily, steam rising from his shoulders. Of the chimera, nothing remained, not even dust. The fraying that had so thoroughly infested this part of the forest was gone, washed clean by their combined, absolute power. Talia stood breathless, her spear feeling heavy in her numb hands, the smell of ozone and rain filling her lungs. She stared at Percy. She, a daughter of the king of the gods, had just unleashed her ultimate power in perfect, devastating harmony with the son of his greatest rival. She had felt their powers connect, intertwine, and become something greater than the sum of their parts. She looked at him, at his calm authority, his overwhelming power that he wielded not with arrogance, but with a fierce, protective precision, and she felt a shocking, profound sense of connection. It was a kinship that went deeper than blood, deeper than their shared history. It was the resonance of one untamable force of nature recognizing another. The wild, independent spirit that had led her to the hunt, that reveled in the freedom of the storm, had just found its echo in the heart of the sea. Her sacred oath to Artemis, the vow that had defined her entire life, suddenly felt, for the first time, like the bars of a cage. And on the other side of those bars stood her cousin, the Lord of the Maelstrom, looking back at her with the eyes of a king. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. A Council of Storms. The transition from the oppressive, weeping rainforests of the north to the shores of the Aegean was a form of psychic whiplash. One moment they were mired in mud and the visceral memory of battle, the next they were breathing air that was warm, clean, and tasted of salt and sun-baked thyme. Percy had brought them to a place that did not exist on any chart, a flicker of impossibility in the azure heart of the Greek Sea. He had brought them home. His home. The island rose from the sea not as a jagged volcanic spire, but as a gentle, sweeping curve of white stone that seemed to have been grown rather than quarried. It was a small, personal world, no more than a few acres in size, but every inch of it was a testament to his new power. A waterfall cascaded down a terraced cliff, but the water was not fresh. It was purified seawater that glowed with a soft, internal light, humming with a clean, potent energy before returning to the sea. The central villa was not a copy of any one style, but a harmonious fusion of them all. The foundational structure had the open, columned grace of a Greek temple, but it was built with the sturdiness and practicality of a Roman commandery. The gracefully curved roof was of dark, polished wood reminiscent of a Shinto shrine, and the interior courtyard held not a statue, but a single, ancient olive tree that grew beside a perfectly serene koi pond. He had named it Ethelgard, a name he'd plucked from some half-remembered story, meaning, noble protectorate. It was a fortress, a sanctuary, and a declaration. Their arrival was a silent affair, each of them absorbing the impossible reality of the place. Annabeth's architect's mind was reeling. The lines were too perfect, the materials too pure. The columns weren't just supporting the roof, they felt like they were actively holding up the sky, channeling the very light of the sun. She saw arches that should have collapsed under their own weight and cantilevers that defied the laws of physics. It was a place built not with engineering, but with pure, solidified intent. It was beautiful, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen, for it was a physical monument to the ever-widening chasm between her world of rules and Percy's new world of creation. Reyna, ever the praetor, saw it differently. Her eyes scanned the natural deep-water harbor, the clear lines of sight from the villa's balconies, the single defensible point of entry. It was a fortress, perfect and unassailable. A new capital for a new kind of power. She saw order, strength, and sovereign ground, and she felt a profound sense of rightness. As if she had come home to a Rome she had only ever dreamed of. Talia, wiping the last of the rainforest's mud from her boots, felt an unexpected sense of peace. For a place so clearly and powerfully made, it felt astonishingly wild. The wind that swept through the open colonnades was untamed. The olive tree in the courtyard was ancient and gnarled, a piece of raw nature at the heart of the impossible artifice. She could feel the raw, untamed power of the sea thrumming through the very stone beneath her feet. It was a fortress, yes, but it was also a storm given a place to rest. It resonated with her own restless spirit. Akari simply stood at the edge of the courtyard, her head tilted as if listening to a silent music. The balance is perfect, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. The key of the sea, the sky, and the land, they are not in conflict here. They are in harmony. This place, it is a prayer made manifest. Percy led them to the villa's heart, a circular, open-air chamber that looked out over the sea. In the center of the polished stone floor was a round, shallow pool of the same luminous, purified seawater. "We're not all here yet," he said. He knelt by the pool and touched its surface. He murmured a name that felt ancient and green in the air. Laelia. The water in the pool swirled, and an image bloomed above it, Wav. N from light and the shimmering spectra of moisture in the air. It was Laelia, the dryad from the silent grove. She was more vibrant and solid than they had ever seen her, her amber eyes glowing with life. Her form was no longer confined to her grove. The bond Percy had forged with her allowed her to project her consciousness, her spirit, to his place of power. Her gaze was fixed on Percy, a look of such profound, elemental devotion that it was a force in itself. Percy then touched the water again, his expression growing more serious. He spoke another name, this one feeling deep and cold and heavy. Callista. The luminous water in the pool turned black as the abyssal deep. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. An immense pressure, both physical and psychic, filled the chamber. As if they had been instantly transported to the crushing depths of the Marianas Trench. From the black water, an image rose. It was a woman of terrifying, alien beauty. Her skin was the pale, pearlescent white of a deep-sea creature, and her eyes were solid silver, holding no pupil, only the reflected light of a world without sun. Her hair was a slow-moving cloud of inky blackness, and she wore armor crafted from obsidian and the shells of some unknown, colossal crustacean. This was Callista, the ancient Nereid, the primordial voice of the sea. This was her first appearance before the group, and her presence was an immediate, crushing display of power. Her silver eyes swept over the room, dismissing Annabeth, Reyna, Talia, and Akari as fleeting curiosities. They settled on Percy with an unnerving, proprietary intensity. "Less than you have built a pretty shell on the surface, little king," greater than her voice echoed in their minds. It was not a voice of words, but of pressure, the sound of a LD cracking under the weight of the ocean. "Less than, but the true war will not be fought in the sun. The sickness bleeds from the depths. Why have you summoned me to this airy place? Greater than." The council was assembled, a daughter of wisdom, a praetor of Rome, a lieutenant of the hunt, a Miko of the Shinto gods, a primordial dryad, and an abyssal Nereid. And at the center, the son of the sea who had become something more. The air hummed with the tension of 6 different worlds colliding. The purpose of the council was singular: to devise a unified strategy against the fraying. The result was an immediate and total impasse. Each woman, a leader and a powerful force in her own right, saw the conflict through the lens of her own world, and each proposed a solution that was a perfect reflection of her nature. Annabeth, predictably, went first. She stood and paced the edge of the chamber, her hands moving as she laid out her thoughts with the sharp, clear precision of a master lecturer. The fraying is a phenomenon, not just an army. It has patterns. It has behaviors. What we did in New York in the forest was reactive. We were plugging leaks in a crumbling dam. It's not sustainable. We need to be proactive. We need more data. We need to find the source, the origin point of this sickness, as Callista calls it. We analyze its nature, its weaknesses, and we devise a single, surgical strike to neutralize it. It's a puzzle. We need to solve it, not just fight it. It was the Greek way: to outwit the monster, to solve the labyrinth. Reyna's response was immediate, her voice a counterpoint of Roman pragmatism. A source strike is an unacceptable risk. We know nothing of the enemy's full strength. To march our entire force to a single point is to invite a catastrophic defeat. Annabeth, your strategy is a gamble. I propose containment and consolidation. We establish safe zones: Camp Half-Blood, New Rome, places like this Ethelgard. We use our combined power to create metaphysical walls, spiritual bulwarks to protect the mortal and divine centers. We fight a war of attrition. We hold the line, we secure our territory, and we slowly, methodically, reclaim what has been lost. We do not gamble. We endure. We win. It was the Roman way: to build walls, to hold the line, to outlast the enemy. Talia scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. She leaned against a column, her arms crossed, her punk rock energy a stark contrast to Reyna's martial stiffness. Walls. You want to hide behind walls while the world burns. This thing is a plague, not an army. It's everywhere. The Chimera wasn't attacking a fortress. It was killing a forest. The only way to fight a plague is to hunt it down. We need to be a rapid, mobile strike force. We stay lean, we stay aggressive. We use satyrs, nymphs, hunters, anyone with a connection to the wild, as our eyes and ears. When a manifestation appears, we hit it, hard and fast, and then we move on. We bleed it to death, one cut at a time. It was the hunter's way: to be the predator, to never stop moving, to live for the chase. The debate grew more complex, more metaphysical. Akari spoke, her quiet voice cutting through the martial arguments. You all speak of fighting the shadow. But the shadow only exists where there is no light. The fraying consumes weak and disordered ki. Our world's spiritual vitality is low. It is wounded from your wars. We should not be focused solely on attacking the disease. We should be strengthening the patient. We must perform rituals, re-sanctify ley lines, awaken dormant spirits. We must reinforce the world's own spiritual immune system so that it can resist the parasite on its own. Lelia's image shimmered in agreement, her thought voice a gentle cascade of feeling. Less than the Miko speaks the truth of the leaf and the root. The world's heart is not in your cities or your camps. It is in the ancient places. The silent groves. Heal them, and the world's blood will run pure again. My grove was one heart. There are thousands. They are crying out. Greater than. Callista's abyssal presence brought a chilling finality to the discussion. Less than your surface squabbles are like the arguments of sea foam. You debate how to tr. I am the poisoned leaves while the roots are being devoured. The fraying is a deep sickness. I can feel it in the pressure, in the cold currents that should not be. It bleeds from a wound, a tear in the fabric of what is real. This wound is not in your forests or your cities. It is in the dark, in the deep, where the world was first made and can be unmade. All your efforts on the surface are pointless until the wound is sealed. Greater than. The impasse was total. They were 6 doctors arguing over a dying patient. Annabeth wanted to find the bullet, Reyna wanted to staunch the bleeding, Talia wanted to kill the shooter. Akari wanted to boost the immune system, Lelia wanted to perform a heart transplant, and Callista wanted to perform brain surgery. All were valid, all were necessary, and all were completely at odds with each other. The strategic debate inevitably frayed, its edges unraveling to reveal the raw, emotional tensions beneath. The polished floor of the council chamber became a courtroom for their fears and frustrations. "This is getting us nowhere," Annabeth finally burst out, her composure cracking. She turned on Percy, who had remained silent, listening, his face an unreadable mask of calm. "We need a decision, Percy. A plan, not 6 different philosophies. You're the one with this incredible power. What's the plan? You can't just keep showing up and performing miracles. That's not a strategy, it's a prayer." Her voice was sharp with a desperation that went deeper than tactics. It was the cry of a woman who felt control slipping through her fingers, whose greatest weapon, her mind, was failing her. It was a demand for him to be the old Percy, the one who followed her plans. Talia straightened up from her column, her silver eyes flashing. "It's a hell of a lot better than one of your blueprints. Annabeth, we were dead in that forest. Your plans and Raina's discipline didn't do a thing. He showed up and he was the storm. Sometimes that's all the strategy you need." Her defense of him was fierce, immediate, and possessive. It was the declaration of a newfound allegiance, a challenge to the old order of their friendship. "Emotion is a tactical liability," Raina cut in, her voice cold and even, trying to wrest the conversation back from the brink. "Talia, your aggression is an asset, but it is not a plan. Annabeth, your caution is wise, but it is leading to paralysis. We need to triage the threats and formulate a multi-stage operational procedure." She was trying to manage them, to impose a Roman sense of order on the Greek and Hunter chaos. But her words were just more oil on the fire. The chamber fell silent, the air thick with the unspoken conflict. Percy had listened to it all, his gaze moving from speaker to speaker, his stillness a stark contrast to their turmoil. He had let the storm break. Now, it was time to calm the waves. He rose to his feet, and the simple motion commanded the absolute attention of every powerful being in the room. He didn't radiate power or raise his voice. He just was, and his presence was enough. He walked to the center of the room, standing beside the pool where the images of Lelia and Callista hovered. "You are all right," he said, his voice quiet but resonant, filling the space. "And you are all wrong." He looked first at Annabeth, his eyes softening, the cool authority replaced by a deep, familiar warmth that made her heart ache. "Wise girl," he said softly. "You're trying to put a blueprint on a hurricane. You want to understand it so you're not afraid of it. So you're not afraid of me." He took a step closer. "I don't have all the answers. I don't know the physics of what I'm doing. All I know is how it feels. And it feels right. Like I've finally learned to breathe underwater after a lifetime of holding my breath. I know it's scary. It's scary for me, too. But I'm still me, and I need you. Not just your plans. I need your wisdom. I need you to trust me, even when it doesn't make sense." He wasn't commanding her. He was pleading with her, offering her a vulnerability that disarmed her more than any show of power could. He then turned his gaze to Raina. "Praetor, you see a world in chaos. And you want to build a fortress to protect it. You are the strongest pillar I have ever known. And you are right. We need to protect the people. We need to create sanctuaries. Your strength, your discipline, it's the shield that will let us fight this war without losing everything we're fighting for." He validated her, not just as a warrior, but as a leader, a protector of civilization. His eyes found Talia's, and a flicker of their shared, wild energy passed between them. "Talia, you say I am the storm. So are you. You're right. We can't hide. We have to hunt. You and your hunters. You are the tip of the spear. The lightning that strikes from the sky. Without your aggression, without your courage to face the darkness head-on, all the walls in the world won't save us." He honored her wildness, her ferocity, and the elemental kinship they had forged in battle. He looked at the images in the pool. "Akari, Lelia, Callista, you three see what the rest of us are only just starting to understand. That this is a war for the world's soul, not just its body. Akari, you are the healer of its spirit. Lelia, you are the healer of its heart. And Callista, you are the one who understands its deepest blood, its primordial beginnings." He stood in the center of them all, a living keystone. "You've all been arguing over which tool to use. Annabeth, you want a map. Raina, a shield. Talia, a spear. Akari and Lelia, a healing salve. Callista, a surgeon's scalpel. The fraying isn't one enemy. It's a multi-front cataclysm. We don't need one strategy. We need all of them. At the same time. A new understanding began to dawn in the chamber. The friction of their debate began to transform into the hum of a complex, powerful engine being brought online for the first time. Percy laid out his vision, not as a commander issuing orders, but as an architect revealing the master plan that incorporated all of their designs. We don't need a single leader, he said. We need a council, a circle. Reyna, you and Annabeth will work together. Build the fortresses, coordinate the defenses for the camps and other divine sites. Annabeth, find the patterns. Build your map. Find me the source. You two are our foundation. Annabeth and Reyna looked at each other, a new, grudging respect in their eyes. Greek intellect and Roman discipline. A potent combination. Talia, he continued, you will lead the hunt. You'll have access to every resource I can provide. Satyrs, nymphs, my own constructs as scouts. You will be our rapid response. You are our spear. Talia grinned, a fierce, feral smile. It was the perfect role, the one she was born for. Akari, Lelia, your work is the most important. You will guide a new group, healers. Satyrs, nymphs, children. N of Apollo and Demeter who are willing to learn. You will travel the world and heal the spiritual and natural wounds. You are our lifeblood. Without you, we're just fighting for a corpse. Lelia's image glowed with a renewed light. Akari bowed her head, a deep sense of purpose settling upon her. Callista, you are our deep reconnaissance. No one else can go where you can. Scout the depths. Find the wound. You are our eyes in the dark. The abyssal Nereid's silver eyes considered him. Less than a bold plan, little king. You ask much. Greater than. I am, Percy acknowledged. And I will be the one who connects it all. I will be the reinforcement for Reyna's walls. The power behind Talia's spear. The source of energy for the healer's work. And when you find the wound, Callista, I will be the one who closes it. He wasn't at the top of a pyramid. He was at the center of a web, the point from which all the other threads drew their strength and their connection. He had taken their 6 competing storms and orchestrated them into a single, functional, terrifyingly powerful weather system. The tension in the room was gone. In its place was a quiet, profound sense of purpose. They looked at each other, no longer as rivals or allies of convenience, but as the founding members of a new order. They were a council of storms, and they had just found their center. A fragile, powerful hope had been born on that impossible island. Not a hope for victory, but for a chance to fight. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Forging a Legend. The Council of Storms had been a declaration of war. The weeks that followed were the war itself, a grinding, attritional conflict fought on a dozen fronts across the globe. From her new command center on Ethelgard, a chamber of sea stone and glowing water maps, Reyna coordinated a global defense with the discipline of a Caesar. She dispatched legions and cohorts, both Roman and Greek, to reinforce divine sites, her strategies relayed by Hermes and Iris messages. A fusion of ancient and modern command. Annabeth worked beside her, a blur of motion and intellect, her mind sifting through the torrent of information, seeking the patterns in the fraying's chaos. Her fingers flying across her bronze tablet as she built the most complex threat analysis model the world had ever seen. Talia, in her element, became a phantom of vengeance. She and her hunters, bolstered by Percy's scouting constructs, sentient currents of water that could slip through any crack and report back what they sensed, became a global rapid response force. They read in the blighted steppes of Russia to hunt a pack of reality-glitching barguests and vanished, only to reappear in the Amazon to put down a hydra whose regenerating heads were spawning conceptual paradoxes. They were winning, but for every head they severed, 2 more seemed to grow elsewhere. They were staunching 1,000 wounds on a creature that was bleeding from 1,000,000. Akari and Lelia, their powers intertwined, led the healing front. They moved from one dying natural wonder to the next, from the fading Great Barrier Reef to the silent redwood forests of California. With them traveled a small, dedicated cadre of nature spirits and children of Apollo, learning to see the world not as a collection of objects, but as a living web of energy. They were reinforcing the world's spirit, but the task was monumental. They were trying to refill an ocean with a thimble. They were winning every battle, but they were losing the war. The realization crystallized during a council session. The holographic images of Lelia and Callista flickering above the central pool, Reyna's face grim, and Talia's, joining from a windswept Patagonian cliffside, etched with weariness. "We can't keep this up," Talia stated. Her voice raw. "We're spread too thin. For every manifestation we put down, another pops up on the other side of the planet. We're chasing echoes." "She is right," Annabeth conceded, gesturing to a global map that was lit up with an alarming number of red, pulsating warning runes. "My projections are grim. At the current rate of manifestation and our current operational tempo, we achieve total strategic exhaustion in 3 months. The fraying doesn't get tired. We do." It was Akari who gave their problem a name and a potential solution. "We are trying to warm house by lighting 1,000 individual candles," she said, her voice a calm center in the storm of their anxiety. "What we need is a furnace. A central heart that can pump warmth, stability, order, heat, through the entire house at once." Annabeth's eyes lit up, her mind immediately translating the spiritual metaphor into a technical schematic. "A broadcast tower. A global amplifier. Percy," she said, turning to him. "Your power is the signal. The song of creation you used in the grove. But to broadcast it on a planetary scale, the feedback would be immense. It would tear you apart. You need a focus, a divine-grade antenna to modulate and broadcast the energy safely." The idea settled in the room, vast and terrifying in its ambition. Not just to fight the fraying, but to build a machine to heal the world. "A reality anchor," Annabeth murmured, already sketching on her tablet. "A grand Yorishiro," Akari corrected gently. "An object to call the spirit of the world back into itself." Percy looked at the faces of his council, at the exhausted hope in their eyes, and nodded. "All right," he said, "let's build a furnace." The blueprint they conceived was a thing of impossible complexity, a fusion of divine technology, spiritual artistry, and primordial power. Annabeth's designs were breathtaking, a multi-layered sphere of interlocking rings and gyroscopes, all centered on a hollow core. It would require 3 fundamental components, each from a different branch of existence: a divine physical vessel to house the power, a pure spiritual core to give it a coherent, life-affirming purpose, and a primordial natural catalyst to connect it to the world's fundamental essence. The quest to forge their legend had begun. Their first stop was the Forge of a God. Percy, Annabeth, and Reyna traveled to Hephaestus's celestial workshop, a place that was less a building and more a self-contained solar system of pure industry. They stood on a celestial bronze platform overlooking a nebula where new stars were being born, their raw, chaotic energy siphoned off by continent-sized machinery to fuel the lame god's impossible creations. Automatons the size of mountains, their eyes burning with the light of captured suns, moved with a ponderous grace, hammering out what looked like plates of armor for entire constellations. The air chimed with the sound of 1,000,000 celestial hammers, a symphony of creation that was both deafening and beautiful. Hephaestus met them not in his usual grizzled, soot-stained form, but in one of his more impressive battle suits, a 15-foot T. All behemoth of polished bronze and gold that moved with an unnerving, silent grace. His true, divine eyes burned from within the helmet, filled with an ancient, obsessive intelligence. "So," the god's voice boomed, synthesized and filtered through the armor's vox casters. "The new power in the world comes to my workshop. I felt your little project in New York. A very loud piece of work. Messy. But the energy signature," he trailed off, one colossal metal hand gesturing for them to follow. "Fascinating." Annabeth, ever the daughter of Athena, presented her designs, her voice clear and confident as she laid out the schematics for the reality anchor. Hephaestus listened, his helmeted head tilted. He projected her designs as a 10-foot-tall hologram, manipulating the image with gestures, zooming in on the complex power conduits and energy matrices. "Ambitious," he rumbled. "The materials are challenging. Celestial bronze for conduction, imperial gold for stability, adamantine for the core housing. Woven with threads of my father's purest Olympian silver to handle the divine resonance. Difficult, but possible." His glowing eyes swiveled from the hologram to Percy. "But this is just a container. A very expensive, very complicated bottle. The wine you intend to put in it, that is the real problem." Show me. Percy stepped forward. Reyna placed a steadying hand on his shoulder for a moment, a silent gesture of support. Before he met the god's gaze, he didn't enter his full sage mode. He simply held out his hand and let a small, controlled amount of his true power flow. A perfect sphere of water, internally lit with the soft, cerulean glow of his focused iicor, formed above his palm. Inside it, miniature galaxies of light swirled in a pattern of breathtaking, ordered complexity. Hephaestus went utterly still. A dozen mechanical arms, tipped with incredibly fine sensors and scanners, emerged from his armor and surrounded the sphere, analyzing it, measuring it. The god was silent for a full minute, and the ambient noise of the forge itself seemed to dim. Incredible, Hephaestus finally breathed, his synthesized voice now stripped of its booming quality, replaced by why the hushed awe of a true genius encountering something beyond his comprehension. I understand the laws of magic. I understand the physics of creation. Your father's power is simple thermodynamics, he manipulation of kinetic and potential energy in water molecules. My power is the application of heat and force to rearrange matter. This, he gestured to the sphere in Percy's hand. This is different. It doesn't obey the laws. It writes them. The energy isn't just flowing, it's encoded. It's not power, it's syntax. You aren't commanding reality, boy. You're suggesting edits to its source code. The god's scanners retracted. He looked at Percy with an entirely new level of respect, the respect of one master craftsman for another. I will build your device, he declared. My fee is not gold, or favors. My fee is access. I will build this vessel around you, and you will allow me to study this syntax as I work. To understand how you do it. It will be my masterpiece. Hephaestus had been won, not by a plea or a threat, but by the irresistible allure of a new and beautiful puzzle. While the divine vessel began its long and complex construction, the second quest was already underway. Percy, Talia, and Akari journeyed to the Japanese Alps, to a place hidden from the mortal world by powerful Shinto wards. This was Akari's home ground, and as they passed through the great torii gate that marked the entrance to the sacred mountain, the very air changed. It became crisp, clean, and so saturated with pure, natural ki that Percy could feel his own power humming in happy resonance. The forest was ancient and perfectly serene, with towering cryptomeria trees, moss-covered stone lanterns, and the constant, gentle sound of a hidden brook. The kami we seek, Akari explained as they walked a path paved in smooth river stones, as Oyamasumi, the great mountain-possessing deity. He has slept for millennia. We are not here to fight or to take. We are here to ask for a gift. And if he says no? Talia asked, her hand resting on her hunter's bow, her silver eyes scanning the unnaturally silent woods. This serene quiet felt more unnerving to her than any monster's roar. Then we will have failed. Akari replied simply. The shrine was not a grand building, but a simple, open-air pavilion of unvarnished cedar at the foot of a colossal, snow-capped mountain that was the god's sleeping body. But the path to it was not unguarded. As they entered a grove of swaying bamboo, the world seemed to shift. The path vanished, and they were surrounded by an impenetrable forest of identical stalks. An illusion, a spirit maze. Talia immediately prepared to fight, to blast her way through. But Percy held up a hand. Wait. Brute force is the wrong answer here. He remembered the lessons of the scroll, the principles of harmony and balance. He closed his eyes, not trying to see through the illusion, but to feel his way through it. He extended his senses, feeling the flow of the mountain's ki. The subtle currents of energy that were the spiritual equivalent of a stream. One path felt right, calm, harmonious. This way, he said, and led them through the maze without a single wrong turn. Their next trial was a test of a different sort. The path led to a chasm, spanned only by a single, silk-thin thread of spider's web. Below, the mist was thick and white. A test of balance, Akari murmured. Physical and spiritual. Talia, with her hunter's grace, was confident she could cross. But Percy knew this was his test. He had to show the mountain his control. He stepped onto the thread, and for a moment, he felt it sag. But then he channeled his power, not to fly or to create a bridge, but to achieve a state of perfect equilibrium with the world around him. He matched his own internal energy to the whisper of the wind, the pull of the earth, the hum of the mountain. He walked across the chasm as if on solid ground, his balance absolute. As they neared the shrine, the final guardians appeared. They were not an illusion. A pack of rogue Okuri Inu, wolf-like yokai with burning eyes and fur of shadow, leapt from the trees, drawn by the power of the approaching demigods. "These ones are my problem," Talia growled, a fierce grin on her face. This was a language she understood. While Percy and Ikari proceeded to the shrine's platform to begin the ritual, Talia became a whirlwind of silver and lightning. She was the perfect guardian, her arrows flying with deadly precision, her hunting knives a blur, her every move a dance of lethal grace. She held the line, a single, unbreachable wall between the yokai and the sacred ground. At the shrine, Ikari knelt and began a low, beautiful chant, a song of reverence for the sleeping god. Percy knelt beside her. He did not chant. He simply reached out with his senses, with his power, and spoke to the mountain in its own language. He projected feelings of respect, of harmony, of the desperate need of the world outside. He showed the mountain the creeping gray of the fraying, the silence in Lelia's grove, the pained glitches of the chimera. He did not demand, he asked, and as a sign of his sincerity, he drew a single, glowing drop of his own potent iicor from his fingertip and let it fall onto the mossy stone of the shrine. An offering, a gift. The mountain responded. It did not wake. The ground did not tremble. But a profound, ancient sadness seemed to well up from the deep rock, a sorrow for the wounded world. And from the very peak of the colossal mountain, a single, tiny point of light detached itself and fell, streaking through the sky like a slow, deliberate shooting star. It landed silently on the shrine's altar before them. It was a piece of crystal, the size of a bird's egg, and it glowed with a pure, white light. It was as cold as the mountain's snow and as warm as the planet's heart. Within it, a single point of silver light pulsed like a steady heartbeat. It was the crystallized tear of a sleeping god, a gem of pure, concentrated spiritual energy. They had the core. Back on Ethelgard, the final components arrived. In the communication pool, Lelia's image appeared. She held up her hand. And from her palm, a branch grew. It was gnarled and ancient, the wood a deep, rich brown, and it was covered in tiny, luminous green leaves that pulsed with the life of her reborn grove. Less than the heartwood, greater than her thought voice sang. Less than it has never known a moment of silence. May it remind the world of the song of life. Greater than the branch passed through her holographic image and materialized, solid and real. Resting on the edge of the pool. The natural catalyst. A day later, the pool turned to black, abyssal ink. Callista's regal, terrifying form appeared. Her silver eyes were fixed on Percy. There was no ceremony, no pronouncement. She simply raised a hand, and from the depths of the pool, a single object rose to the surface. It was a pearl, the size of his fist, but it was blacker than any night. And it seemed to drink the light from the room. It did not reflect, it contained. Within its dark, swirling surface, tiny, captured points of bioluminescence glittered like trapped stars. It radiated a cold, crushing pressure, the silent, absolute power of the bottom of the world. The primordial catalyst. The final scene was not on Ethelgard, but back in the heart of Hephaestus's celestial forge. The components were assembled. The divine vessel, a breathtakingly complex sphere of interlocking gold, silver, and bronze rings, sat waiting on a massive pedestal. Annabeth stood before it, her tablet projecting the final schematic into the air. Reyna and Talia stood guard, a silent, formidable presence. Percy walked forward, holding the glowing heart of the mountain, the living heartwood branch, and the impossibly dense primordial pearl. Hephaestus, his divine eyes burning with the focused intensity of a creator at the moment of Genesis, nodded once. All the pieces are here. The smith god rumbled. Let the forging begin. Chapter 8 end. Chapter 9. The Dragon's Maw. The heart of Hephaestus's forge was a place of silent, focused genesis. The chaotic sigh, mphony of a million celestial hammers had been stilled, the star-fueled furnaces banked to a low, expectant hum. All the vast, cosmic industry of the lame god had paused to bear witness to the final act of creation. In the center of the grandest workshop, resting on a pedestal of cooled neutron star matter, was their hope, the reality anchor. It was a work of impossible beauty, a celestial orrery designed to map the soul of the world. The divine vessel Hephaestus had forged was a sphere of interlocking rings, celestial bronze, imperial gold, adamantine, and Olympian silver, that spun in silent, complex, and counter-rotating orbits. They moved not with the logic of machinery, but with the grace of a celestial dance. At its core, suspended in a perfect gravitational stasis, were the three catalysts. The heart of the mountain pulsed with a soft, steady white light, a beacon of spiritual purity. The heartwood branch radiated a gentle, vibrant green, the undeniable signature of life. And the primordial pearl did not glow at all, but instead seemed to pull the light into itself, a point of infinite density and potential, the raw, untamed power of the deep sea given form. "It is done," Hephaestus rumbled, his voice resonating from his towering battlesuit. He stood back from his creation, his divine eyes burning with a mixture of pride and something that looked like fear. "The vessel is perfect. It will hold the energy. It will focus it, but the process of attunement, of activation, it will be like teaching a newborn god to sing. The first note will be a whisper. The final chorus will shake the foundations of reality." The god turned his massive helmet toward Percy. "When you begin, you will send a ripple across existence. And the thing you fight, the great nothing, it will feel that ripple. It will turn. It will come for you. And it will come for my creation. Be ready." Transporting the anchor to Ethelgerd was a feat in itself, requiring the combined power of Percy to levitate it on a platform of solidified seawater and Hephaestus to ensure its complex mechanisms remained in perfect balance. They placed it in the central chamber of the island villa, the open-air room, becoming the control center for the fate of the world. The humming rings of the device seemed to resonate with the island's own inherent power, the song of the waterfalls and the whisper of the wind weaving themselves into its potential. Akari moved around it in a slow, reverent circle, placing a final array of complex warding seals on the floor, not to contain the anchor's power, but to help guide it. To give it a language the world's ley lines could understand. Annabeth, her face illuminated by the glow of a dozen holographic schematics projected from her tablet, ran the final diagnostics, her expression one of extreme, terrified concentration. The air was still, heavy with the ozone scent of a storm about to break. Percy stood before the anchor. His council was assembled, a ring of grim-faced, powerful women ready for the final battle. Reyna and Talia stood at the perimeter of the chamber, their weapons drawn, their gazes fixed on the sky. Annabeth was at her command console. Akari knelt in a meditative trance. The images of Lelia and Callista hovered over the pool, their projected forms more intense than ever, channeling the raw power of their domains directly into the island's foundations, turning Ethelgerd into the most conceptually fortified point on the planet. This was it. Percy took a deep breath and placed his hands on the cool, humming metal of the outermost ring. He didn't shove his power into it. He listened. He extended his consciousness, his intent, and gently, carefully, he began to sync the rhythm of his own inner storm with the silent, waiting hum of the machine. The connection, when it came, was not a jolt. It was a sensation of opening, of dissolving. His mind, his very soul, expanded. He was no longer just Percy Jackson, standing in a room. He was the island. He was the sea around it. His senses stretched, flowing outwards along the world's invisible ley lines. He felt the sleeping strength of the Rocky Mountains, the ancient, dreaming life of the Amazon, the frantic, buzzing energy of Tokyo, the deep, cold stillness of the Antarctic ice. He felt the entire, beautiful, wounded soul of his world. And through the anchor, he began to sing to it. The first note was a whisper. A low, resonant hum emanated from the anchor, a vibration so deep it was felt more than heard. It spread from Ethelgerd like a ripple in a pond of cosmic stillness. And across the world, for a brief, beautiful moment, the fraying faltered. In a London hospital, a flickering light bulb steadied and shone brightly. In New Rome, a small void spot near the Senate House filled in. The grass growing back instantly, green and healthy. In a blighted section of Lelia's grove that had been beyond her reach, a single, new leaf unfurled. It was working. And then the world screamed. The fraying, the great, parasitic nothingness, had felt the touch of pure, ordered creation. It had felt the needle of reality's own immune system plunging into its being. It reacted not with strategy or malice, but with the mindless, absolute, overwhelming response of an infection fighting its cure. It focused all its diffuse, world-spanning horror on the source of the pain. On Ethelgard, the sky above the island did not darken. It did not fill with clouds. It simply broke. A jagged, spider-webbing crack appeared in the middle of the blue Aegean sky, a crack that was not black, but a colorless, light-devouring void. It was a wound in the very fabric of space-time, and from it, the raw essence of the fraying began to pour not as a fog, but as a deluge of anti-existence. From the heart of the tear, a form descended. It was not a creature of flesh or shadow. It was a being of negative space, a hole in the world given a horrifying, predatory shape. It was colossal, its multi-limbed, insectoid form defined only by the way the sky and the sea warped and bent around its edges. Where its many eyes looked, color and saturation bled from the world, leaving behind a monochrome, lifeless gray. It did not roar. Instead, a cone of absolute, unnerving silence emanated from what should have been its mouth, a silence so profound that the very atoms within it seemed to cease their vibration. It cast no shadow. Below it, on the surface of the sea, was a spreading patch of perfect, flat nothingness, where the waves themselves were erased. This was the fraying's antibody, an avatar of oblivion, the dragon's maw. The battle for reality began. Percy was still locked in place, his body rigid, his eyes glowing with the pure, cerulean light of his overflowing power. He was the engine, the battery, his entire being focused on feeding the anchor, which was slowly, painstakingly, increasing the power and frequency of its stabilizing song. He couldn't move, he couldn't fight, he could only trust them. Annabeth. From her console, the world was a stream of horrifying data. Energy shields at 90%. Callista, Lelia, the avatar is projecting a conceptual decay field. Reinforce the island's existential matrix. She yelled, her words a bizarre fusion of magic and science. A wave of green and deep-sea blue energy pulsed up from the island's foundations, meeting the wave of gray decay and holding it at bay. Its main weapon is a focused erasure beam. Evasive maneuvers won't work. It doesn't travel. It simply ceases to exist in one place and starts existing in another. Reyna, Talia, you have to intercept, not dodge. Reyna and Talia. They were the shield wall. The avatar didn't just attack directly. It spawned echoes, lesser horrors, that calved off its main body like icebergs of nothingness. Glitching harpies whose songs were blasts of white noise, spectral dracanae whose lower bodies dissolved into clouds of television static. Reyna was a fortress of imperial gold and Roman will. She met the tide, her shield held high, her gladius a blur of disciplined, perfectly executed strikes. She didn't try to kill the echoes with single blows. She imposed a zone of absolute order around her, forcing them into a reality solid enough to be destroyed. Beside her, Talia was a storm of righteous fury. She was a whirlwind of silver and lightning. Her arrows finding the weak points in the echoes, unstable forms, her aegis shield replica flashing with the face of Medusa, momentarily solidifying the phantoms with pure terror before she shattered them. They fought back to back, the perfect, disciplined defense of Rome and the ferocious, untamed offense of the hunt, a partnership forged in the heat of battle. My shield, your spear. Reyna yelled. My ground, your sky. Talia screamed back, loosing a fork of lightning into a cluster of gathering shades. Akari. She was the soul of their defense. She knelt in a trance at the foot of the anchor, her hands a blur of esoteric mudras. All around the perimeter of the central chamber, her Ofuda tags burned with a brilliant white light, forming the great boundary seal. From her perspective, the world was a tapestry of colored light, and the avatar's aura was a wave of caustic, gray ink, seeking to blot it all out. Her seals were the last line of defense, not for the island's body, but for its idea. The strain was astronomical. The gray ink crashed against her barrier again and again. A thin trickle of blood ran from her nose, but her chanting never wavered. She was holding back the end of the world with the strength of her spirit. Percy. He was a prisoner in his own body, his consciousness a raging ocean trapped behind the dam of his duty to the anchor. He felt everything. He felt the impact of every blow on Reyna's shield. He felt the crackle of every lightning bolt from Talia's spear. He felt the spiritual agony of Akari's defense as if it were his own. He felt the anchor's insatiable hunger for his power, drawing his life force out of him, a torrent of blue and gold energy flowing from his hands into the machine. The anchor's activation sequence crawled upwards. 48%, 52%, it was too slow. The avatar seemed to sense it. It paused its spawning of echoes and focused its terrifying, multifaceted gaze on the central villa. The maw of silence opened wide. Incoming, Annabeth screamed. Full power erasure beam. It's targeting the anchor directly. A beam of pure, concentrated nothingness, a perfect cylinder where reality ceased to be, shot from the avatar's maw. It didn't travel, it simply was. Akari cried out, a sharp gasp of pain. A third of her seals, the ones directly in the beam's path, turned to black ash. The boundary was breached. The beam struck the island. Reyna was there. With a warrior's roar that echoed with the might of 2,000 years of Roman history, she threw herself in its path. Her shield, a gift from Athena blessed by Bellona, met the beam. There was no explosion, no sound. The metal simply ceased to be. It dissolved, flaking away into non-existence. The beam struck her breastplate. The imperial gold screamed, "Gee!" glowing white-hot as it fought its own dissolution. Reyna, Talia shrieked, firing a volley of arrows that vanished uselessly into the beam. The Roman praetor was thrown backwards, her armor smoking. Her body racked with tremors as she collapsed, saved only by the sacrifice of her divine shield. The beam continued, now aimed at the heart of their operation. They were out of time. They were out of options. A choice formed in Percy's mind, a choice born of love and rage. Both. I have to do both. He split his consciousness, a feat of mental discipline that should have been impossible, an act of sheer, desperate will. With one half of his soul, he maintained the agonizing, life-draining flow of energy into the anchor. And with the other half, he let go. The room erupted in light. Not the harsh light of an explosion, but the brilliant, life-affirming light of a star being born. Percy's body, the physical anchor of his being, became a conduit for his unleashed soul. He didn't just enter sage mode. He shattered its limits. His form blurred, expanded, and erupted outwards and upwards. He became a dragon, a colossal, titanic being of pure, swirling energy, its body woven from the churning power of a hurricane. Its scales the shimmering, condensed light of life itself, its eyes two burning, cerulean suns. His roar was not a sound of destruction, it was a chord of pure genesis, a.s. hawkwave of creation that slammed into the avatar's aura of nothingness and, for the first time, made it recoil. The dragon of the sea and the maw of the void faced each other. It was a battle of absolutes. The avatar's tendrils of unmaking lashed out. Percy met them with newly formed lances of solid, glowing water. The maw breathed a cone of decay that caused the very stone of the island to age 1,000 years in a second. Percy answered with a torrent of pure, generative energy, a river of life that washed over the stone, and where it touched, vibrant, impossible flowers bloomed from the cracks. He was not fighting it. He was refuting its very existence. The avatar, a being of pure negation, seemed to feel a conceptual version of fear. It gathered itself for one final, ultimate attack, its entire form compressing into a singularity of erasure aimed at Percy's heart. The Dragon King did not meet it with a beam of his own. He met it with an embrace. He opened his own colossal maw of light and storm, and he did not consume the avatar. He enveloped it. He poured his entire, unrestrained, infinite being into the creature of perfect nothingness. He force-fed the void a feast of existence. He drowned the silence in an ocean of song. For a being of pure negation, the sudden, overwhelming, absolute infusion of everything was the ultimate poison. The avatar of the fraying did not scream. It did not explode. It simply was not annihilated by an overdose of being. As the last vestige of the maw vanished, the reality anchor, fed by the last dregs of Percy's conscious will, hit 100%. The device flared, its interlocking rings spinning into a blur of pure white light. It released a single, beautiful, perfect C major chord, a note of pure, unadulterated reality that expanded from Ethelgard at the speed of thought, washing over the entire planet. The tear in the sky sealed itself, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue. The battle was over. The colossal dragon of energy hovered for a moment in the silent air, then collapsed inward, its light fading until it was just Percy, his clothes burned away, his body covered in the glowing, fading markings of his power. He crashed to the stone floor at the foot of the now quietly humming anchor, his eyes closed, his chest still. Unconscious. They had won. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. A New Pantheon. The first sensation was silence. Not the hungry, devouring silence of the fraying, but a deep, peaceful quiet that settled into the marrow of his bones. The second was warmth, a gentle, insistent heat that felt like the first sun on a world freshly made. Percy Jackson's consciousness drifted back into his body, not like a crashing wave, but like a slow, incoming tide. He was aware of the solid, cool stone beneath him, of the soft hum of the reality anchor nearby, a sound that was now as natural and constant as his own heartbeat. He was aware of the scent of brine, of ozone, and of antiseptic. Annabeth. Then, he opened his eyes. The ceiling of the main chamber of Ethelgerd was a mosaic of white stone and polished wood, and through the open colonnade, the sky was a perfect, cloudless, impossible blue. The battle felt like a dream, a feverish nightmare of impossible colors and concepts. But the profound exhaustion deep in his soul was real, as were the figures surrounding him. They were all there, a silent, weary vigil. Annabeth was beside him, dabbing a wound on his temple with a nectar-soaked cloth, her face a mask of fierce, clinical concentration that did little to hide the profound relief in her gray eyes. Reyna, her armor dented and scorched but her posture as ramrod straight as ever, stood at the foot of the dais where he lay, her gaze watchful. Talia was perched on a nearby column like a punk rock gargoyle. Her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of scowling concern and something softer, something he hadn't seen in her eyes for a very long time. Akari knelt a few feet away, not touching him. But her hands were held out, palms up, and a soft, warm light flowed from them, not healing his body, but mending the frayed edges of his spirit. The presences of Lelia and Callista were palpable, a feeling of deep, living green in the air and the steady, rhythmic pressure of the abyssal sea. "Hey," he managed, his voice a dry rasp. The tension in the room broke. Annabeth let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the sky had torn open. Reyna's shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. Talia's scowl deepened, which was her version of a smile. "Don't. Hey, seaweed brain," Annabeth said, her voice trembling slightly. "You were out for 3 days. 3 days. Sorry," he said, pushing himself up into a sitting position. His body ached with a department. He hadn't felt since his dip in the Styx, but his spirit felt calm. The chaotic, raging storm inside him had settled. The power was still there, vaster than ever, but it was no longer a maelstrom. It was a deep, quiet, boundless ocean, and he was its master. The reality anchor hummed in harmony with him, its song a quiet promise that the world was, for now, whole. The 3 days he had been unconscious had not been idle. His council had managed the immediate aftermath. Reyna had already coordinated with Camp Jupiter, confirming the cessation of the void spots. Talia had received reports from hunters across the globe that the warped, glitching monsters were either gone or had reverted to their normal, killable forms. Akari had confirmed with her own pantheon that the silence had lifted. They had done more than win a battle, they had cured the plague. As he slowly regained his strength, a new reality began to set in. Ethelgerd was no longer just his sanctuary, it was the center of the world's new stability. The news had spread through the divine networks. The story of the battle, of the demigod who had become a dragon of pure creation and annihilated an avatar of nothingness, was already becoming a legend whispered in fear and awe from Olympus to the Shinto celestial plains. He was no longer just a hero. He was an event, a paradigm shift. It was on the 5th day. As he stood on a balcony overlooking the sea, feeling the steady, reassuring song of the anchor vibrate through the stone, that the old world came to call. They did not arrive with thunder or a fanfare of trumpets. They simply appeared in the center of the main chamber, a shimmer of gold and a displacement of air. The Olympian Council, Zeus, Poseidon, Hera, Athena, Artemis, Apollo, and Hephaestus. They looked diminished. Here, on this island that was Percy's sovereign ground, under the influence of a power that had succeeded where theirs had failed, their divine arrogance was muted, replaced by a tense, wary respect. Zeus, his face a thundercloud of conflicting emotions, pride, jealousy, necessity, stepped forward. "Perseus Jackson," he began, his voice lacking its usual booming authority. "The council is grateful. You have averted a catastrophe that we, in our wisdom, failed to anticipate. Poseidon looked at his son, his sea-green eyes, so like Percy's own, filled with a father's immense, complicated pride. You have surpassed all heroes, my son. You have surpassed many gods. It was Athena who cut to the heart of the matter. Your power is now a fundamental force in the world. It cannot remain unchecked, an independent and unpredictable variable. Such a thing invites chaos. Zeus nodded, taking his cue. Therefore, the council has reached a unanimous decision. We offer you a place among us. Godhood, a throne on Olympus. You will be the 14th Olympian, the god of tides and the unbroken will. It is your right. It is your destiny. Join us. Bring your power into our order. The offer hung in the air, heavy and golden. It was the ultimate prize, the dream of every hero, the culmination of a life of service. The old Percy would have been stunned, flustered, and would have politely refused for the sake of his friends. The new Percy was different. He met the gaze of the king of the gods without flinching. He was not a subject being offered a promotion. He was a fellow monarch considering a treaty. I am grateful for the honor, Percy said, his voice calm and steady. And I respectfully decline. A murmur went through the assembled gods. Zeus's eye began to twitch. Decline. No one declines godhood. I do, Percy stated, his voice gaining a quiet, unshakable firmness. I thank you for the offer, Lord Zeus, but your order is the past. It's a system of edicts and thrones, of fear and fealty. It is a system that has led to 1,000 wars and left the world so wounded that a plague like the fraying could take root. I have seen a different way. He gestured around the chamber, at the women who now stood silently at his side, his counsel. A path of balance, not of rule. Of creation, not just of command. I don't want a throne on a mountain. My place is here, on the earth, with the people I fought to protect. He looked at his father. I am already a guardian of the seas. He looked at Zeus. And I am a guardian of the sky. He looked at them all. I am a guardian of this world. I don't need a title for that. I only need the will to see it done. The refusal was absolute, not born of a desire for a mortal life, but of a commitment to a different, grander philosophy. The Olympians were stunned into silence. They were facing a power that did not want to join them, did not want to fight them, but simply intended to exist alongside them. He was no longer their champion. He was a co-power, a new, independent pantheon of one. Artemis's silver eyes narrowed, her cold gaze flickering to Talia, a silent, possessive warning. Athena looked at her daughter, a complex calculus of pride and concern in her expression. Poseidon simply nodded once, a tear of golden ichor tracing a path down his cheek, and vanished. One by one, the gods departed, leaving behind a new political reality and a world forever changed. The days that followed were a time of quiet conversation, of redefining a world that had been broken and remade. Percy sought out each of his council, each woman who had stood with him, and they spoke, not as a king to his subjects, but as the founders of a new age negotiating the terms of their future. He found Annabeth in the nascent library of Ethelgerd, surrounded by holographic scrolls and architectural plans. The air was thick with their shared history. Wise girl, he began, his voice gentle. Seaweed brain, she replied, not looking up from her work. They stood in silence for a long time. The unspoken truth was a weight between them. We walked through hell together, he finally said. That bond, it will never break. I will love you for the rest of my existence. You know that, right? She finally looked up, her gray eyes shimmering. I know, and I'll love you. But, the boy I walked through hell with, he's not entirely here anymore. Is he? And the girl who was happy just designing buildings, she's had to become something else, too. He nodded, a deep, sad understanding passing between them. We grew up, and we grew, differently. I'm not that boy, you're not that girl, but the man I've become and the woman you are, they have a world to rebuild. He reached out, not to hold her, but to ouch the blueprint she was designing, a plan for a new, joint Hephaestus Athena University on the island. We're not a couple anymore, Annabeth. Not in the way we were. But we can be partners. The architects of a new age. Can you live with that? A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, but she was smiling. It was a sad, beautiful, hopeful smile. Yes, she whispered. I think we can build something even better. He met Reyna on the highest battlement of the villa, the wind whipping her purple cloak around her. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the horizon like two commanders surveying their domain. The Legion is strong, she said, her report crisp and clear. The camps are secure. You have created a new reality, Jackson. What are your intentions for it? Peace, he answered. Stability. A world where our children don't have to fight our parents' wars all over again. He turned to her. Ethelgerd is sovereign ground, but it is an ally to New Rome. And to Camp Half-Blood. I want to propose a new tripact. A permanent treaty of mutual defense and cooperation. Reyna looked at him, her dark eyes searching his. She saw no ambition for conquest, only a deep, weary sense of duty that mirrored her own. She had spent her life searching for an equal. Now she had found one. The Senate will ratify it. Praetor, she said, nodding to him with a level of respect she had never given another. Praetor, he replied, returning the gesture. The unspoken promise between them was not one of romantic love, but of a deep, abiding partnership in leadership, a bond forged in the fires of shared responsibility. They were the twin pillars upon which a new, safer world would be built. He found Talia on a windswept, wild cliff at the island's edge, a place where the sea crashed against black volcanic rock. She was staring up at the moon, a lonely, defiant figure. Artemis isn't happy, she said without looking at him. She thinks you've corrupted me. Have I? He asked softly. She finally turned, her electric blue eyes filled with a fierce, painful conflict. No, you've opened a door. One I didn't even know was there. My oath. It's my life, Percy. It's my family. I would never ask you to break it, he said, his voice firm. But an oath shouldn't be a cage. Ethelgerd is your home, Talia. As much as the hunt is. You don't have to choose. You can be the lieutenant of Artemis and a guardian of this island. You can have your duty and your family. Here, you have the freedom to be both. He gave her what no one else, not even her goddess, ever had. A choice. The freedom to define her own existence. She stared at him, the wind whipping her black hair across her face, and in her eyes, he saw the beginning of a new path, a future she would have to forge for herself. The unspoken attraction between them was a current of lightning in the air, a story whose next chapter was now, finally, up to her to write. He spoke with Akari in the serene courtyard, the setting sun glinting off the scales of the koi. Theirs was a conversation not of politics or emotion, but of spirit. The world's key is stable, but it is scarred, she said. It needs tending. Then we will tend to it. He replied. But I need a guide. I have this power, Akari, but you have the wisdom to understand it. I want Ethelgerd to be a bridge. A place where Kami and gods and spirits can meet. A place where your knowledge and Annabeth's logic can build something new. Will you be that bridge with me? She looked at him, her dark eyes holding a deep, serene wisdom. It would be my life's great honor, Percy San. Theirs would be a partnership of the soul, a shared quest for enlightenment in a world they were now charged with healing. His final counsel was at the central pool. The images of Lelia and Callista appeared, their presences more real and potent than ever. He made them a simple, unbreakable vow. To Lelia, he said, I am the guardian of the green. Your groves will never know silence again. To Callista, he promised, I am the shield of the deep. The world's blood will run pure. They were not his subjects. They were his anchors to the living world, the land and the sea. Their bond was absolute, elemental, and eternal. The sun was rising, the first dawn of a new age. Percy stood on the main balcony of the villa, the gentle, harmonious hum of the reality anchor a constant, comforting presence behind him. He was no longer just Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon. He was the Lord of Ethelgerd, the unifier, the keystone. One by one, they joined him. Annabeth came first, standing to his right, not as a lover, but as his wisest partner, her mind already charting the course for the future they would build. Reyna stood to his left, a pillar of strength and order. Her gaze fixed on the horizon, ever the watchful praetor. Talia leaned against the railing nearby, a figure of untamed freedom, her gaze flicking between the rising sun and the moon, which was still a pale ghost in the morning sky, a guardian caught between two worlds. Akari stood behind them, a serene presence of balanced spirit, her hands tucked into her sleeves, the calm center of their new, chaotic world. And he could feel Lelia in the vibrant life of the island's plants, and Callista in the deep, powerful surge of the tide against the shore. They stood together, 6 individuals who had become something more. Not a harem, not a king and his queens. They were a pantheon, a council of storms who had found their center and, in doing so, had saved the world. The war was over. The work had just begun. And as the sun cast its first golden rays across the endless, peaceful sea, they faced the dawn, together. Chapter 10 End.